And we left each other last week, and we were talking about, or we had finished talking about, your standard or our standard offer to purchase and contract. So we went through it. We went through it pretty quickly. I'm aware of that. But we went through and kind of pointed out the highlights. I would focus more on kind of the big pictures, like the things that we talked about in class. You also have those pages in your book that reference the more important provisions of the offer to purchase and contract. Don't spend your time reading this whole thing yet. I promise you'll get to read it later when you come to post licensing. But for right now, know the highlights, know the big pictures. We talked about things like due diligence fee and earnest money deposit, due diligence period. Remember, and I will stand behind this, I think of the most of the offer to purchase and contract, the most important thing, particularly for you guys, is the first 2.5 pages, which just defines things. Terms and definitions is the first 2.5 pages. So I think, especially for you guys, and it's important too, because now we have that information to help our buyers and sellers understand. We had the conversation last week, guys, they're not reading this. Very few, let me rephrase that. Very few buyers and sellers are sitting down and reading the offer to purchase and contract. They're relying on me and you. They're expecting us to be familiar with it so we can explain it to them, have a conversation with them about it. So that's where we end. In the pages it talks about it is 587 to 593. Oh, there it is, 587, 287. Why did I say 5? It's only like 300 off, right? 287 to 293. There we go. A couple of you, I know you're just logging on, but your cameras aren't on yet. So this again just goes over the highlights, the provisions. So now what we need to do is talk about some commonly used addenda. Let's warm up. Why don't you guys remind me in a private chat? We'll do a Tuesday morning private chat. Remind me in a private chat, when you see the word addenda, what do you see? What does the word addenda tell you? Look at you. Some of you are ready for me. The word addenda. And I do like to hear from everybody. Even if you, good morning. Remember, your answer is just between me and you. Is everybody in? Good morning. So when you guys see the word addenda, what I really want you to see with it is the word add. An addenda adds to and becomes part of the offer to purchase and contract. We attach it when we present it as an offer because it makes the full, complete contract. It adds to the offer. And upon acceptance, that offer becomes, with those addenda, become a contract. Remember, an addenda adds, an amendment changes. So when addenda is presented with the contract, with the offer, I should say, an amendment changes something once we've already gone under contract. We've already agreed, we've already signed, shaking hands, whatever. And now for whatever reason, we're entering into round 2 of negotiations and we need to change something. So what we have now is just some commonly used standard addenda. This is by no stretch of the imagination all of the addenda that we may encounter. There are a lot more out there. Some you may meet and post, some you may never see in your career, but there's a good possibility that there's a form out there. So as you get more familiar with the forms. So what we have today is just some of the more commonly used one. Cool. Some of the more commonly used addenda. If you guys see a test question on these addenda, it's going to give you a scenario and then it's going to ask you which addenda would apply, which addenda would you use. So what we're going to go through is just a very basic understanding. We don't have to look at these forms. So we just need to go through and have a very basic understanding of what these addenda do. As with our listing agreements and with our offer to purchase and contract standard form 2T, our addenda are provided by the North Carolina Association of Realtors. That's what NCAR means, North Carolina Association of Realtors. That is the state level of the National Association of Realtors. So NCAR provide their forms, and they came together with the North Carolina Bar Association, NCBA, North Carolina Bar Association, and they created the forms that we're allowed to use. As with any form, if the form doesn't meet your situation, what do we need to do? If you have a situation and you don't have a form for that, what do we need to do? I see your mouths move. We're going to make a phone call, aren't we? We're going to call our attorney. Yep. Guys, I can't draft. Start telling yourself that. Your morning affirmations should include looking at yourself in the mirror saying, I am not an attorney. We cannot draft legally binding documents. Sometimes there's a conflict between the contract and an addenda. And if that happens, and we're going to talk about a few examples of that, if that happens, the addenda controls. That's why we add it. The addenda is kind of overriding something in the contract. So if you ever have a conflict between contract and addenda, then the addenda is going to prevail. So the addenda we're going to talk about start on page 293. And the first one we have to discuss is an FHA VA financing addendum. This is when your buyer gets an FHA or VA loan. We'll talk a little bit more about this form when we get to financing, because we'll talk about FHA loans. We'll talk about VA loans. We'll talk about conventional and USDA. Here's the deal. This is a perfect example of an addenda overriding a contract. What this form does is protect the earnest money if the home doesn't appraise and the buyer chooses to terminate because the home didn't appraise, even if this happens after the due diligence period. So if we find out after due diligence that the home doesn't appraise for the purchase price, and we will talk more about that process and what that means. We're heading there in units 14 and 15. What this form does is protects the buyer's earnest money, which means they can choose to terminate. And if they do, no matter where they terminate, no matter where in the contract we are, contract period, they'll get their earnest money back. The second piece of this form is in regards to the VA loan. Again, when we talk about the VA loan, we're going to learn some things that the VA requires. For example, the VA generally requires the pest inspection. If it's on a well, the VA will require a well inspection. If it's on a septic, the VA will require a septic inspection. So there are certain inspections that the VA requires the buyer to get. Here's the kicker on that. The VA requires the buyer to get it, but they don't let the buyer pay for it. So if we're getting something inspected and the buyer can't pay for it, who's left? Who's going to pay for it? If the buyer's not going to pay for it, then who's left? The other party is the seller. As a listing agent, do you think that's important to have this conversation with your seller to let them know if you accept this offer, you may be on the hook for the pest inspection. You may be on the hook for the septic. You may be on the hook for the well water inspection. FHA VA financing addenda. We also have a couple forms. We're going to lump them together, saying the same thing, just differently. So we could be dealing with a buyer possession before closing or a seller possession after closing. We briefly mentioned these the other day when we were looking at our contract. And typically possession happens after closing. In other words, the buyer shouldn't be getting keys until that new deed is recorded, until it's a done deal. However, the parties may agree to do a buyer possession before, which means the buyer moves in before closing. or to do a seller possession after, which means after closing, the deed changes hands and the seller stays. So we have a form for both of those scenarios. Again, you guys don't need to know the numbers, but we just need to have an understanding of what the forms do. And in both of these situations, one party is acting as the landlord and the other party is acting as the tenant. One party is the homeowner. The other party is living there. We're going to charge rent. Rent's negotiable. How many days? By the way, these are short-term use, anything more than a week or two, because this is in no means a full-blown lease. This is just meant for a short-term situation. So we got to still hash out, you know, who's responsible for what. The forms tell us who's responsible for utilities and lawn maintenance. But the biggest part of these, the biggest things to understand, whomever is acting as the landlord still has the deed in their name. They still need to have homeowners insurance. The other party that's acting as the renter, they need to have renter's insurance, tenant's insurance. And that's the big thing, is to make sure everybody's properly insured. We're going to see these again when we look at our insurance unit. Got a whole unit dedicated to insurance. So we'll see these again when we get to unit 13. Another commonly used addenda we have is the lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addenda. We looked at this in unit 20. Private chat, again, making sure you guys are warmed up. Lead-based paint addenda is required on all properties built prior, residential properties built prior to what year? What's the magic year with lead-based paint? So yeah, the magic year with the lead-based paint was anything built prior to 1978. Again, you guys, please understand, this form does not say your home was built before 1978, you have lead in it. This form says because your home was built prior to 1978, it may have lead in it. It's meant to act as a seller disclosure. And then the buyer's encouraged to inspect, investigate if they choose during their due diligence. They want to have it tested for lead, help educate the buyer on the dangers, possible dangers of lead in the home. Remember, it mostly affects children, those little developing organs and bodies. Another commonly used addenda, and in my experience, probably the most commonly used addenda, is an additional provisions addendum. This form contains provisions that are fairly common, pretty popular, but they're just not popular enough to make it into the standard offer to purchase and contract. They're close. We keep using them and we may see them in our contract one day. So a couple things that the additional provisions addendum covers. It could allow for the offeror to put an expiration date on their offer. So let's say I'm presenting an offer today and I say this offer is good until 5 p.m. on February 9th. If I want to let the offeree know that my offer is going to expire at 5 p.m. on February 9th, I would use the additional provisions addendum. If we don't have acceptance by 5 p.m. on February 9th, the offer's dead. The offer has expired. So we can put an expiration of the offer. If there's a septic tank on site, or if we're looking at vacant land and the buyer may want to consider having a PERC, P-E-R-C test done to determine, what the PERC test does is determine if the land will support a septic tank. So if we're dealing with a septic tank, we got our additional provisions addendum to provide us with that information. If it's a rental property in North Carolina, the buyer buys honoring any existing leases and tenants. So if it's a rental property, if we have a tenant in place, then we have this provision. The seller needs to provide the buyer during their due diligence information about the tenant. They need a copy of the lease. They need to know if the tenant's delinquent on rent, where they are. Once again, that takes us back to a buyer deserves to know what they're buying. So if they're going to inherit a tenant when they buy, if the tenant's going to come with the property, if a lease is going to come with the property, then we're going to use our additional provisions addendum to get the buyer the information they need. Another thing covered in this form is agreed upon repairs and or improvements. Next to the expiration of offer, I'd say this agreed upon repairs and or improvements is the most commonly used one. These are repairs that we might be asking for at the time that we're presenting the offer. We have no idea if this thing's going to become a contract or not. But we went to the showing, we saw that something was clearly broke. And the buyer says, I'm not going to buy this house if this isn't fixed. So how we can communicate that with the seller, how we can have the seller take that repair into consideration with the buyer's offer is to include this agreed upon repairs provision of the additional provisions addendum. Please understand, once this offer or if this offer becomes a contract, this does not negate the buyer's due diligence period. They are still encouraged to have the home inspection, pest inspection, They're still allowed to ask for repairs after we've had the inspection. This is asking for something, like I said, you're at the showing, something's clearly broke or needs improved, and the buyer wants the seller to consider this at the time they're considering the offer. Let's say it's a home with like a, the back sliding glass door goes out into a patio or something. And you look at this sliding glass door and you see a little chip in it. Maybe the lawnmower threw a rock at it. And now that chip is starting to spider a little bit. Do you need a home inspector to look at you and say, this is broke? I mean, we may not know much about home improvement. Do you need a home inspector to say this is broke? Probably not. So that might be an example. I used this one time. I had a couple, I was helping them buy a house. They didn't have kids. They didn't plan on having kids. We went to a property. We went out back and there was a nice playground out there. Nice. Like all three of us wanted to go play. It looked like so much fun. And my buyer said, we don't have kids. We don't have a need for this. Can we ask the sellers to take it down? To which case I said, sure. We included our additional provisions addendum. The seller accepted. And by the time closing rolled around, that playground, unfortunately, was gone. If the property has a manufactured or mobile home on it, there's information covered under the additional provisions addendum. Is it going to stay? Is it going to go? The information on it, like the VIN number if applicable, that kind of thing. And then newer to this form is if there's a pool or a spa, an outside pool or spa. So let's say, for example, you're helping a buyer buy a property this time of year and the outdoor pool or spa has already been winterized. This provision covers who's going to pay to have it on winterized so the buyer can have it inspected if they choose. We have to agree to who's responsible for paying to have it on winterized and re-winterized. Now, obviously, if it's in August, the pool should be open. It should be available for inspection. So this is a good provision for this time of year, for example. Another commonly used addendum we have is something called the Owners Association Disclosure Addendum. This is the one we're going to use in the event that the residential property and owners association disclosure statement is not required. You guys remember we looked at the RPODs in Unit 8. This was the seller disclosure. Mandatory form with optional disclosure. And the seller had 3 choices. They could say yes, no, or no representation. Part of that form includes owners association information. So what if the RPODs isn't required, but it's in an HOA? The buyer still deserves to know about the HOA. They still deserve to know about the owners association. So when we're not going to use the RPODs, we have this form to cover that. The biggest reason why the RPODs might be exempt is new construction or never before lived in dwelling. If you have a new construction, you still want information on the owners association. We have a vacation rental addendum. Does anybody currently live at the beach? No. Anybody currently live in the mountains? No. You guys heading there one day? Maybe as we get closer to retirement, we're going to head one way or the other. You know, Winston-Salem is lovely, right? But people aren't vacationing here. So we're not dealing much with the vacation rental addendum in this part. However, if you go to the coast or you go to the mountains, if you go selling property by a lake, you may be dealing more with vacation properties, in which case you'll have a need for the vacation rental addendum. We're going to talk just a little bit more about the Vacation Rental Act. I don't remember offhand which unit, but there's like one thing we need to know about the Vacation Rental Act. If you are in an area or you're moving to an area that's high in vacation rental properties, you obviously need a lot more training on how vacation rentals, because when they're sold, they're usually sold subject to some existing agreements. And that's what we'll talk about. I think it's in Unit 11. Don't hold me to that, but we'll get to it. Now just know we have a form if we're dealing with selling a vacation rental property. Another addenda that we have that we're going to talk more about in our financing units is the short sale addendum. In a short sale, the seller is underwater. What I mean by that, the seller owes more on the property than what they can sell it for. They're underwater. And whether or not we can use a short sale or a short sale addendum, if it's going to be a short sale property, may depend on the lien holders. We have to get their approval. That's one thing that this form addresses. Getting the lien holder's approval. Buyer and seller are going to negotiate the terms like they always do. They're going to agree to purchase price, due diligence, earnest money, closing dates, all that good stuff. Then we're going to add this form. This form creates a contingency. Remember what we said about a contingency last week. I can't do this before that happens. So what this contingency is saying is, I cannot sell my house until I get the lien holder's approval. And if I don't get all of the lien holder's approval, then I'm no longer on the hook to sell my house. Before I can sell, we have to get that approval. And that's what the contingency that this form creates. Don't let the name fool you. The name has nothing to do with the time that these things take. These are known for taking a long time. They say on average, you can expect about 6 months. From contract to closing, you can expect about 6 months. Lien holders are not known for quickly deciding if they want to approve these things or not. Because guys, what the lien holder has to approve, they're agreeing to take less than what they're owed. Remember, the seller owes less than the property. So in order for the lien holders to clear the lien, they have to agree to take less. So there's no guarantees. Again, we'll talk more about short sales when we get to 14. But I did say that the buyer and seller negotiate due diligence and earnest money. The buyer doesn't owe due diligence until we have the lien holder's approval. The buyer will put earnest money in the escrow account. But if it doesn't get approval, if it doesn't close, they're going to get their earnest money back. Remember that earnest money is showing good faith. And then the last commonly used addenda we have is a backup contract. This is what we attach to our offer when the property is already under contract. The buyer in this case hopes to come up and be placed upon acceptance, be placed in a backup position. And once that buyer's in the backup position, this is kind of funny to think about this, but it is what it is. The backup buyer is standing off to the sides, fingers crossed, hoping that the primary terminates for any reason. Because if the primary terminates for any reason, now the backup moves to that primary position. So we're under contract, another offer comes in. The buyer, the backup buyer is hopeful to be in that backup or that secondary position. Again, we're going to negotiate all the terms like we always do. So we know if the backup becomes the primary, they know their purchase price, due diligence, earnest money. They don't have to pay due diligence until and if they move to that primary position. They will put earnest money in an escrow account. But if they never become the primary, they're going to get their earnest money back. Just showing their good faith. Some sellers like this because if that primary terminates, especially in this crazy market we're coming out of, now the seller doesn't have to open their home for showings again. They don't have to deal with 45 offers again, right? So some sellers like this. Other sellers say, no, if my primary terminates, I want to see what I can get. So let's go through this again. Entirely up to the seller if we accept a backup contract addendum. And the other thing about this form is that it only allows for one backup. So I can have one backup. I can't have a backup to the backup and a backup to the backup to the backup, right? That just got kind of legal, didn't it? So it allows us for one backup. And as we said, these addenda that we're looking at on pages 293 to 295, these certainly aren't all of them. I got plenty of other forms. There's actually a joke down at the commission where you ask a question and a good response is, we got a form for that. And more often than not, they got a form for that. Again, if you run into a really unique situation and they don't have a form for that, we all know what to do, right? We're going to call our attorney. I recently learned that some of you younger folks may not know what this means. So when you see some of us older folks doing this, I'm picking the phone up. I guess I need to do this, don't I? That would be. We have other forms. There's forms to help us with our repair request. There's a form specifically called the response to the buyer's offer. This is an opportunity just for that, for the seller to respond to the buyer's offer. We have forms to aid us in negotiations, and then unfortunately, sometimes we have to terminate. So we have several different termination forms, depending on the situation, which one we may use. Don't really get into termination forms in this class. You'll see a little bit more in post-licensing. Any questions about our commonly used addenda? Moving right along, page 296, we talk about submitting offers to the seller. We have a duty to present all offers to the seller immediately, but in no event later than 3 days. So once you get an offer in your hand, we have a duty to present this to the seller. This could be the listing agent presenting the offer to their seller. This could also be the buyer's agent presenting the offer to the for sale by owner. The seller is a seller, so whoever needs to communicate with the seller, we have a duty to deliver those immediately, but in no event later than 3 days. And which offers do we present? Which ones? All of them. The lowball offer that's just insultingly low, that's just going to make your seller mad. Do we have to present it? Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about some alternative land conveyances in just a bit. An offer is an offer. We've got to present those. We present all offers to our sellers. And guys, please remember, I'm just a special agent, so I cannot accept or reject an offer on my seller's behalf. I can't make decisions. I can't make, I can advise, I can assist, but I cannot accept or reject on the seller's behalf. So if you're a seller, you're a listing agent, you have a home on the market, and your seller says, we're going to go out of the country and we're going to be off the grid for 2 weeks. If anything comes in over X amount, just go ahead and accept it for me. Can I do that? No, even at my principal's instructions. Please remember, I follow my principal's lawful instructions. So in that case, what do? Well, maybe we ask them to go to find a hot spot somewhere and touch base with me once a week, or once a day, every couple of days. Maybe they can leave that authority with a family member here. Maybe they trust a family member or friend to make those decisions for them. But if I don't have anybody to talk to, if I don't have anybody to present an offer to, and they're not going to be around for 2 weeks, my absolute best bet might be take the home off the market. Take it temporarily off the market. It's a discussion you need to have with your seller. What if you're going to go away? What if you get to take a vacation? Real estate agents try to take a vacation sometimes. And there's an old saying in this industry that says, if you want to sell a house, just go on vacation. Because Murphy's Law says about the time you're pulling your suitcase out your closet, your phone's going to start blowing up. So if you want to go off the grid for a couple weeks or a couple days, you need to ask somebody to help you out. Ask your BIC to help you out. Ask another coworker in your office. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You could also take your work with you. It's 2023. Take your laptop to the beach. But we just can't disappear, because real estate happens even while we're gone. And I think seriously, guys, if the president of the United States of America can take a vacation, then so can the real estate agent. Would you guys agree? So plan your vacations, go on vacation. Just make sure you're either taking it with you or you have coverage while you're gone, because even while you're gone, the show goes on. Questions on submitting offers to sellers? Then we talk about multiple offers. If we have multiple offers, we have more than one offer for the seller to decide, for the seller to determine what to do with. If we have more than one offer, the fact that we have multiple offers is not a material fact. Whether or not we disclose that we have multiple offers is up to the seller. The seller decides if we disclose this or not. And here's why. We need to have the conversation with the seller to make sure they understand. Some buyers, when they find out there are other offers, Some buyers do not want to fight that. They don't want to be competitive. They don't want to get involved with that. Some buyers may run away. They may choose not to present their offer because they don't want to get involved in that competition. Other buyers, when they find out there's multiple offers, it may cause them to up their game to present a better offer. So whether or not we disclose that is up to the seller. The rule does not say that you can't pick up the phone and ask. If you're a buyer's agent, you can call the listing agent and ask, do you have other offers? The rule covers how the listing agent responds. So don't let yourself get caught off guard. When that other agent calls you and says, do you have other offers? You need to have had this discussion with the seller to know how to respond. And we always have to respond honestly. Isn't an honest answer, my seller doesn't want to disclose that? Isn't that pretty dang honest? When we get multiple offers, we have to deliver them at the same time to the seller. Whatever I have in my hand right now, we deliver to the same time in no particular order. I cannot favor one offer over the other. I think one thing that we started seeing last week when we looked at our offer to purchase and contract, there's more terms to consider than the purchase price. There's the due diligence fee, the earnest money. Is the buyer asking for any seller pay closing costs? Do they want the seller to provide a home warranty? So the highest offer may not always be the best offer. Don't just present the highest and say, accept this and put the other ones off to the side. What if, let's do a shake your head, yes or no. What if you're the listing agent and one of these multiple offers comes from another agent in your firm? Can I favor that one over all the other offers? Yes or no? Can I favor the one from the other agent in my firm? But guys, the firm's going to make more money if we accept this one. Can I favor it? No. What if one of those multiple offers is coming from you? You are acting as a dual agent. You're working with both seller and buyer. Can you favor your buyer's offer over all the others? Yes or no? No. But seriously, you're going to make more money. We cannot favor offers. We present them all the same time in no particular order. I'll tell you something that came from this crazy multiple offer world that we're just getting out of, still in, but not like it was for sure. One thing I noticed a lot of listing agents do, and keep in mind, we still have to present the offer. We still have to send the offer. But something that listing agents were doing to help the seller sort through all this, we're creating like an Excel spreadsheet. So they had like the terms of offer one, purchase price, due diligence, earnest money, closing date, da, 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 da. And then the terms of offer two, terms of offer three, terms of offer four. So the seller could see a nice side-by-side comparison as opposed to overwhelming them with all that offer paperwork, all those emails. Doesn't matter. We just have a duty to present them at the same time in no particular order. And we can't shop offers. Remember, we cannot disclose the terms of an offer without the offeror's permission. So as the listing agent and multiple offer, when another agent calls you and says, what's the highest offer you have in your hand right now? Can I answer that question? Can I answer that question? No, not unless I have that offeror's permission. Is that offeror going to give me permission? Probably not. So again, there's no rule about them picking up the phone and calling you. The rules address how we respond. So when that other agent calls you and says, what's the highest offer you have on your hand? You say, I have multiple offers. Bring me your buyer's best, and we'll respond. We'll see what we have. We cannot disclose those terms. And I certainly can't shop offers, so I can't pit buyers together. I can't look at one agent and say, this guy offered this much. I know how much this guy's offering, right? Like I can't pit them together. You may run into a situation where you are a buyer's agent working with two buyers that are interested in the same property. Doesn't that sound like a lot of fun? Again, you can't pit your buyers together. You can't say, I know for a fact this is what the Joneses are offering. Can you beat them? That's what we mean by shopping offers. So we cannot share the price or the terms. You cannot shop offers. As a matter of fact, I have a commission rule about that. Commission rule 58A.0115. Again, you don't need to know this. I just have it here for reference. And this is the rule that says disclosure of offers prohibited. We cannot disclose the terms of an offer without the offeror's permission. Questions on that? Contract modifications and counteroffers. We decided that any change is a rejection. Maybe it's a counteroffer, maybe it's a rejection. A rejection or counteroffer is a rejection with a but. If we're making numerous changes on the paper, we're doing lots of strike throughs and initialing and dating the new terms. If our paper starts looking like we can't read it, we got numerous of changes, then we need to use a new form, a nice clean form with all of the newly agreed upon terms. If we're negotiating with the other agent via text or email, document that, you guys. Keep that. That shows that meeting of the minds, the mutual assent. And we got to keep, what do we document? Everything. I think we're all good on that now. Yes. What do we document? Everything. So when you're the listing agent, you get 45 offers in on your listing. We can only accept one, right? Which means I got 44 rejected offers. I got to keep all of those offers, even though those offers, or when those offers never become a contract, we have to keep those offers, whether they become a contract or not. Keep them, document everything. By the way, in a multiple offer situation, you can only counter one at a time. If I counter 5 and all 5 accept, I put my seller in a bit of a pickle, didn't I? So in a multiple offer situation, we can only counter one at a time, if need be. For the rejected offers, do you advise them they weren't accepted? Is it a requirement? Unfortunately, it's not required. I think that's like common courtesy. We know how some people feel about common courtesy. But I think it's just polite to let the other 44 know, thank you for your offer. We've accepted another one. Best of luck to you and your buyer, right? How long did that take me to type out? I wish it were a requirement.
So if you have all the other offers, but not a backup, can you reach back out to any of them if it falls through?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that offer, when that contract falls through, about the time I'm putting it active on MLS, I'm emailing those 44 agents and I'm saying, back on the market, bring me a new offer, right? They can't present the same offer because that one's been rejected. Other questions? And then we talk about furnishing copies. We need to get, general rule of thumb, when a party signs it, they deserve a copy of it. So we have a duty to send instruments, documents related to the transaction to our parties within 3 days of signing. maybe you can email it, maybe you can share it through Dotloop, may depend on how savvy your buyer or seller is. If you have a buyer or seller that doesn't have a computer, doesn't use email, we still have a duty to deliver it to them. Now we're at the office printing out all that paperwork and handing it to them within 3 days. So when we go under contract, the buyer and the buyer's agent, the seller and the seller's agent need a copy, right? Those 4 parties need a copy. Buyer's agents, when you go under contract, of course, pause for a second and do your little mini celebration. Always celebrate the small wins throughout the transaction. The buyer's agents, you go under contract, you do your mini celebration. The first thing I need you guys to do when you get that signed contract, executed contract in your hand as a buyer's agent, is get that thing to the lender. Because I'm here to tell you guys right now, the lending process is the longest part of the contract to closing process. So we got to get that signed contract to the lender ASAP so they can start working on their piece of it. Buyer's agents, once you send it to the lender, go ahead and get it to the closing attorney so they have it, so we can schedule settlement. We're all shooting for the date that we agreed on. So let's go ahead and get it on the books. If it doesn't happen on that date, attorneys are used to rescheduling settlement as well. It just happens. But if we can go ahead and get it on the date that we've agreed on. Questions? Comments? Dotloop is just an e-signatures program your firm may have available. There's Dotloop, DocuSign, SkySlope. There's several different programs out there. It allows you to electronically fill in forms, send out for signatures, e-signatures. You used Dotloop when you signed the contract for Lane when you started this class. I think she uses Dotloop. Okay. So I got some yes, no questions for you guys. I need to see you because I need to shake your head, yes or no. So what we're going to do now is kind of walk through the scenario. This is a good place to review the scenario of when that magic moment in time, when it goes from being an offer to a contract. Remember, we talked about our magic moment. I need those 2 things to happen, must have those 2 things to happen. Let's walk through a scenario. The buyer offers a purchase price of $150,000 with $250 in due diligence, $250 in earnest money, $1,500 in closing costs, and a closing date in 3 months. They ask for a home warranty, and of course, they want that refrigerator. Shake your head, yes or no. Are we under contract? Shake your head, yes or no. Are we under contract? No, we just got started, didn't we? The buyer's made an offer. The seller has an offer in their hands. What are the seller's 3 choices? They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. Offeree always has 3 choices. So in this case, the seller counters. They say they don't want to pay any closing costs. You are not getting my refrigerator, and I want to close in 6 weeks. All other terms are acceptable. So what we mean by that is we're good on the purchase price. We're good on the due diligence. We're good on the earnest money, right? We started here. We just got a little closer. What we did with that counter was create negotiations for the closing costs, the date. Let's see, they're good with the home warranty too, I think. So we've agreed to some things, but we haven't agreed to everything. So the seller counters. Shake your head, yes or no. Are we under contract? Seeing everybody shake your head no, and I would agree. Now the ball's in the buyer's court, back in the buyer's court, right? And the buyer has 3 choices. They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. Nobody's bound in a counter offer. It's presenting a new offer with different terms. So the seller counters, the buyer has 3 choices. The buyer accepts the terms of the seller's counter and tells their agent to go for it. What do we mean when we learn that the buyer has accepted it in pre-licensing? What does that mean? It means it's been signed. So the buyer's accepted, they told their agent to go for it. Yes or no? Are we under contract? They accepted. Are we under contract? Not yet. I still got one more thing to happen. Selling agent calls the listing agent and says, you have yourself a deal, my buyer is accepted. Now are we under contract? Here we go. That's those two things that we must have. We have to have the last offeree's acceptance. And then we must have communication of acceptance across the line. The person making the offer needs to know that their offer's been accepted. Questions on this? Okay. Another question for you guys. Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. Everybody in? Okay. So this one says on Sunday, a listing agent receives a written offer for 145 on a house listed at 154.9. On Monday, the seller counters at 149.9 and gives the buyers 3 days to accept. On Wednesday, the buyers reject the counter, and upon being informed, the seller says he will accept the buyer's original offer. Under these conditions, what do we have? Nothing. Rejection kills the offer. There is no going back. Once it's been rejected, it is dead on the table and there is no going back. Now, let me ask you guys this, another opportunity to shake your head, yes or no. Could the seller go back to the buyer and make a brand new offer with those terms? Could they make a new offer to the seller with it? Yes. They can't go back and accept it, what's been rejected, right? But they can present a brand new offer. Remember, when we're bouncing that ball back and forth from the offeror to the offeree, nobody's bound until we have acceptance and communication of acceptance. That's when people are bound to the contract. No longer an offer, it's now a contract. Questions? Okay. Let's take our break. When we come back, we talk about alternative land conveyances and we talk about your midterm. Are we back? All right, so the cameras are on. I'm going to take attendance. And the last little piece of unit 10 we have is not the most important piece of unit 10. I do think you guys should look over this, as you probably will get a test question. I do not think you should spend all your unit time, study time on this last section. We're getting to see a bunch of green stars. Some green stars, some relief of all these red stars we've been seeing in the last 4 units. So what we need to talk about now is what I refer to as alternative land conveyance methods. Not all properties are the traditional buyer buys, seller sells. So we have some other options that we may, or alternatives that we may encounter. And the first one that we may come across is something called an installment land contract. And with an installment land contract, the buyer is paying the seller the purchase price, but they're not doing it in one lump sum. They are doing it in, what's my marker? Installments. So the buyer is making payments to the seller. So they're paying for the purchase price, but they're not doing it in one chunk. They're doing it in installments. With these, the buyer is known as the vendee, the receivee of the installment land contract. The seller is the vendor, the giver of the installment land contract. The buyer gets what's known as equitable title, which means they get permission to live there. The buyer gets possession. The seller is going to keep the legal title. The seller is going to keep the deed. And in the event of the buyer's default, the seller still owns the property. Now, when we get into units 14 and 15, we're going to talk about something called seller financing. Seller financing and installment land contract are very similar. In seller financing, the seller's acting as the lending institution. So the buyer's paying the seller directly. The difference between the two is when the deed changes hands. In an installment land contract, the buyer gets the deed after they make that very last payment. In seller financing, the buyer gets the deed at closing. So we'll revisit that just a little bit to compare seller financing to the installment land contract. We look at an example of what this might look like. A buyer agrees to purchase real property and to pay the seller the sum of $105,000 in the following manner. Take $5,000 at the execution of this contract, the balance of $100,000 together with an interest rate of 12% until paid in full. Said principal and interest shall be payable in 240 installments of no less than $1,101.09 per month, beginning on this date. So the buyer's making these agreed upon payments for however many payments we need, however many installments, until this is paid in full. Pluses and minuses to everything. Same with the installment land contract. There are pluses and minuses. So let's talk about the seller advantages and disadvantages. The seller may be able to take some tax benefits. They still own the property. The property is still in their name. The deed is still in their name. This might make a way for a seller to sell a hard to sell property. Maybe you have lots of repairs that need to be done, and the seller finds a handyman that's willing to work on repairs while they're living there, for example. We can make those kind of arrangements. The biggest advantage to the seller is they get to keep the deed. They keep the title until that last payment is made. The big disadvantage to the seller, low down payment. If the seller needs that money now, then they're going to have to sell. But as long as they're okay with getting payments over the next however many months, this could work for the seller. But again, if they need that, what did we just say, $105,000 purchase price now, then the seller may not be able to do this. So the seller's going to get low down payments. They're not going to get all their money all at once. Pluses and minuses to the buyer. The big advantage to the buyer, this could be a good option if they have poor credit. Maybe the lender doesn't want to give them a chance, but the seller is willing to. So this could be a good option. We just said the seller has a hard to sell property, and now the buyer is hard to finance. So that might be a good example when we can work together. The buyer's living there. They're probably the ones paying taxes. So they too might be eligible for some tax advantages. In these cases, when it comes to anything tax, we're going to have our clients CY other A, and now they're not calling their attorney. Now we encourage them to call their accountant. Big disadvantage to the buyer is in the event of their default. Default meaning the buyer misses a payment. The buyer doesn't make a payment. The law provides that the seller has to give them 30 days to come up with the entire note due. So the buyer misses a payment, the seller calls the entire note due. If the buyer doesn't come up with that in 30 days, they're out. And the seller will keep whatever money they've already previously collected. They don't have to give that back. And then the buyer disadvantage, they can't use the property for collateral because it's not theirs yet. They don't have the title yet. We do not have a pre-printed form for installment land contracts. So if your buyers and sellers want to enter an installment land contract, what do we need to do? We need to call our attorney to draft something up. If you're a listing agent, shake your head yes or no. You're a listing agent. You get an offer from a buyer to do an installment land contract. Do you have to present that to your seller? Do you have to present this to your seller? Should see every head shaking yes. Why? Because what offers do we present? All of them. An offer to do an installment land contract is an offer. We got attorneys involved because I just said we don't have pre-printed forms. So we have attorneys involved. Connors Act is going to kick in. Connor says there's certain documents that have to be I'm not even seeing mouths move. Private chat. Connor says that there are certain documents that have to be what? Connor says there are certain documents that have to be recorded to be enforceable. So by recording this installment land contract, we're preventing the shady seller from selling it out from underneath the buyer. So Connor says it has to be recorded. Another alternative land conveyance we have is something called an option to purchase. You guys remember back at the beginning of Unit 9, we talked about bilateral and unilateral contracts. How many sides to the bilateral contract? How many sides have to perform to a bilateral contract? Both sides. How many sides have to perform at a unilateral contract? Just one. The option to purchase is our example of a unilateral contract. There are not two promises going on here. The buyer has not promised to buy. The buyer has simply requested the option to decide if they want to buy. They've requested the option. If we agree to the terms, the only promise made in an option to purchase is from the seller. And the only promise that the seller is promising is that they will not sell to anybody else during this option time, during this option period. So these are the way these things work. Buyer and seller agree on all the terms up front. Basically, what the buyer's saying is, if I decide to buy, these are the terms that I'm going to buy at. So we agree to price and dates and all that good stuff up front. At the end of the option period, the buyer either buys or they don't. If they decide to buy, that unilateral contract now becomes a bilateral contract. Once we get through our option period, if the buyer decides to buy, now they're on the hook. Their promise is to buy. Another thing that makes these unique is we don't just have one form of consideration. These must have two. So in addition to the purchase price, there's also an option fee. These are usually pretty healthy. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a seller. Somebody comes up to you and they offer you an option and they pretty much prevent you from selling your property for a week, a month, a year. We can negotiate the period of time for the option. And you as the seller is going, what in the world would make me agree not to sell my home for a year? And what's going to make you agree to do that is usually a pretty healthy option fee. The buyer's paying the seller not to sell during the option period. So this one has two forms of consideration. This says, is this like a lease to purchase? No, the buyer has no rights to the property whatsoever. They're not living there. They don't own anything. They're just deciding if they want to buy or not. Maybe they need to bring their general contractor in. Maybe they need to bring their engineer in. Maybe they're out. Let's say you work for Corporate USA and they decide they want to open a new building up in Asheville. So they send you to Asheville to find them a new location. And when you get up to Asheville, you find two that could work. So you could do an option for both, have Corporate USA come up and check it out and decide which one they want to buy. At the end of the option period, they buy one and they don't buy the other. There's no promise to buy yet. No pre-printed forms for an option. So who do we call? What do we do? I just gave you the answer. Dang it. What do we do? Call our attorney. No pre-printed forms. Statute of fraud says it has to be in writing. Connor Act says it has to be recorded. Both of those kick in. If I'm a listing agent and I get an offer to do an option to purchase, do I have to present that to my seller? Do I have to present this to my seller? Yep. Because what offers do we present? All of them. That little word means a whole lot, doesn't it? An offer is an offer is an offer. We present them all. The other alternative land conveyances that we may encounter are a couple different types of what's known as a preemptive right. So before we look at the types, let's first make sure we're good with a preemptive right. A preemptive right is just a contractual right to acquire property before it can be offered to anyone else. So if you enter into a preemptive right with somebody, they can't sell until they present it to you first. So we have two different types of preemptive rights. The first one is known as the right of first refusal. With this, the owner promises, maybe they don't want to sell yet, but we enter into this preemptive right that says, if you ever do decide to sell and you get an offer, that preemptive right says that you need to go to the contracting party, give them an opportunity to match the offer, match or beat it, before you can agree to sell to that party that gave you the offer. It's not a promise to sell, it's just saying, if I get an offer at any time in the future, I must come to you first and give you the opportunity to beat that offer, to match that offer. We don't know a price. We don't even know if the contracting party is going to buy. All we know is they're contractually obligated to go to that party first to match the offer. I think a good example of this, let's say you live next door to the vacant corner lot. And maybe you have no interest in buying the vacant corner lot, but maybe you don't want Dollar General to buy it either. You may enter into a preemptive right before that owner sells to anybody. They've got to come to you first, and you decide if you want to buy or not, if you want to match that offer. The other preemptive right is the right of first opportunity to purchase. With these, we agree on a price up front. We agree on a price. If I decide to buy later, or if you decide to sell later, these are the terms that we're going to buy and sell. So there's no offer to match. There's no offer to beat. If you decide to sell, I'm contractually obligated for you to come to me first. Again, we've already agreed on a price. I think a good example of these could be your tenants. You may have a tenant in a home for 8, 10, 12 years. They may enter into a right of first opportunity to purchase, which says the landlord is contractually obligated to come to them first if they ever decide to sell. So if we sum these up and do a nice side-by-side comparison, the biggest difference between these two, the right of first refusal, the contracting party has to match a bona fide offer. The first opportunity to purchase, we've already decided. If I decide to sell, if you decide to buy, these are the terms in which that's going to happen. Questions? This is through Unit 10. Key terms back on page 269, key point review, your Cliff's Notes, checklist, if you will. It's on page 302. And then your student quiz is on page 304. Please remember, I've been babbling on about units 7, 8, 9, and 10. Heavily tested units. Today we move on from these units, but you guys have got to keep going back. Please don't put agency and contracts down until you're ready to study for your test. You're going to lose whatever you've already got. You need to incorporate this into your study time, study sessions to keep it fresh. Y'all figured out by now I'm kind of a math nerd, not kind of, right? Okay, I'm a math nerd. And I sat down with your test once and I actually counted. How many questions from your exam come from unit 7, 8, 9, and 10. 40% of your exam is unit 7, 8, 9, and 10. Meaning those units alone, you can't pass, but those are a big chunk, you guys. Questions? Comments? Concerns? Just throw it all out there. All right, everybody put your pencil down. Before we talk about your midterm, I just want to kind of go back and revisit our contract communication wall. And I want to have some conversations about what that wall looks like with different forms of agency. The wall can get a little tricky with different forms of agency. So pretty much what we've been saying so far, and what I fully expect you guys to see on your exams, is you have two firms, two agents. One's working with the buyer, the other one's working with the seller. These are the scenarios, the examples that we've given so far. So the buyer makes the offer to the seller. The buyer's the offeror, seller's the offeree. Buyer makes the offer through their agent. The agent presents the offer to the listing agent. Listing agent calls the seller and says, we have an offer. What are the seller's three choices? They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. If the seller accepts it, that means what? If they accept, that means they have signed. Remember, in pre-licensing world, when you see it's accepted, you know it's been signed. Am I under contract yet? Seller has accepted. Am I under contract? Shake your head, yes or no. Are we under contract? Not yet. Seller calls a listing agent, say we've accepted. Listing agent calls a selling agent, says my guys have accepted. Now are we under contract? Yes, because communication crossed the line. That contract communication line separates the firms, separates agencies. Again, this is fully what I expect you to see on your exams, which is why we've been running through this scenario so far. Questions on this? Contract formation, effective date is what your contract calls it. So let's shake things up a bit, because I know you may see some practice questions with some different scenarios. Those practice questions are making sure that you have a really good understanding. Effective date, the contract defines the effective date as when the last party signs and communication of acceptance crosses the line. So we see that on our terms and definitions. Please look at those terms and definitions in your offer to purchase and contract. So what happens when agency shifts up? What happens to our contract communication wall? Remind me, show me on your hand. How many firms are involved in dual agency? How many firms are in dual agency? How many firms are involved in dual agency? Dual agency is one firm. So what does that do to our contract communication wall? Well, that wall goes away, doesn't it? Now, once the seller accepts, buyer offers presented, seller accepts. When the seller calls their agent and says we've accepted, isn't that just as good as telling the agent that's working with the buyer? So once the seller contacts their agent, it doesn't matter that we may have two agents, it's all about the firm. Agency is always about the firm. Who does the firm represent? So in dual agency, once the seller calls their agent, we're under contract. So we have acceptance, and then we have communication. Obviously, we still need to let the buyer know the good news. So the line, the wall of communication goes away. Because remember, in dual agency, the firm and all the agents are straddling the invisible wall. In designated dual agency, designated, how many agents in designated? How many agents in designated? Always two. So in designated dual agency, the wall comes back. The contract communication wall comes back. You still have the firm, you still have all the agents in the firm representing or straddling the wall, But now you have one agent that's been kicked off the wall, working exclusively with the buyer, a different agent that's been kicked off the wall, working exclusively with the seller. So the contract communication wall comes back. Seller accepts, which means they have signed. They call their agent, but because in designated, they now have that exclusivity again. That's what the seller and the buyer get if we can offer designated. That exclusivity comes back. Seller calls a listing agent calls a selling agent. Now we're under contract. And then the other agency scenario is the seller sub-agency. And in the seller sub-agency, the seller sub-agent is working with the buyer. Remember, in seller sub-agency, the buyer doesn't have representation. In seller sub-agency, the buyer is the customer. So in seller sub-agency, that seller sub-agent is hanging out over here with the seller. The buyer has chosen to go unrepresented. The buyer has chosen to hang out over here by themselves. These two are communicating. These two are communicating. But who does the seller sub-agent represent? Who are they working with? That's their relationship. So now the buyer makes an offer. The seller sub-agent calls a listing agent calls a seller. Seller accepts. Seller calls their agent and says, we've accepted. Communication crossed the line yet? The wall yet? Not yet. Listing agent calls the agent that's working with the buyer and says, my sellers have accepted. Is communication cross the line? Not yet. And now the seller sub-agent calls the buyer. Now is communication cross the line? Now we're under contract. That seller sub-agency, always remember the buyer is the customer. The buyer is unrepresented. The buyer has chosen to go through this transaction alone. Again, I truly believe for your test, you're going to have a scenario of two firms, which is why we've been running that scenario. You see some practice questions. I think one of you said, you told me last week, you saw some questions on seller sub-agency. Sub-agent stuff is confusing to lots of people. Please don't feel like you're alone. So we need to go back and review it. Go back and review it over and over and over again. Agency in general, you guys, there's not a single one of you right now that is an expert at agency. How you get good at agency, you go back and review it and review it. How much time do we spend in Unit 7? Long time, right? What's that tell you about Unit 7? There's some good test questions that are going to come from that unit. So please, like I said, you need to go back and incorporate it. Go back and listen to our YouTube channels. Go back and reread Unit 7. Remember the license law and commission rule comments that we asked you guys to start reading to get ready for end of this month? The comments talk about agency. The comments talk about the disclosure. So please make sure you're reading and reviewing. Like I said, we move on today, but I need you guys to keep going back and reviewing agency and contracts. Please do not put it down until the day before your test. Fair enough? You've got to incorporate it into your study time. Are things starting to click? Are light bulbs coming on? Yeah. The more you do it, the more it clicks. So with that being said, let's talk about your midterm. Now that we are I would say officially halfway there. Let's talk about your midterm. So first off, I'm going to stop sharing so we can have a nice eyeball to eyeball conversation. Midterm is available. I will show you guys in just a minute where you can access it. I'm giving you a week to do the midterm. I've decided to let you guys do this on your own time. So I'm giving you 1 week. It starts today and it goes through next Monday. The midterm will take you about 2 hours. Well, that's how much time you have. Maybe it'll take you less than that. The midterm is a one-time link. So when you sit down to do the midterm, I need you to be dedicated. I need you to be ready to take that 2-hour test. Everybody with me? So don't think you're going to start it now and then go look something up and come back to it. I want you guys to treat the midterm like your final exam. So give yourself 2 hours of distraction-free time to sit down and take the midterm. It is required, which means failure to complete the midterm within this week means you are not eligible for the end of class exam. Did everybody hear what I just said? Failure to attempt the midterm between now and next Monday means you are not eligible to take the end of class exam. I'm not looking for pass or fail. I just need to know that you tried. So you devote these 2 hours. Is that fair? Can everybody give me 2 hours in a week? I mean, that's pretty reasonable, I think. Okay. You decide it's time to do it. You sit down, you treat it like a real test, and you ask yourself, if I were to sit down and taking the final exam right now, how would I do? Would I pass? Would I be eligible for the retake? Would I fail? Some of you may find that you're doing what you need to be doing and keep doing it. Remember, we do not end today. We keep going on the other half of the material. Some of you, for the midterm, this may be your wake-up call. Some of you may take the midterm and learn you need to up your game. Would you rather learn you want to up your game now, or do you want to learn you want to up your game at the final exam? Let me ask you guys that rhetorical question, right? So use the midterm. I highly recommend you take it seriously. I highly recommend you treat it like a real test. I highly recommend you give it that 2 hours and sit down. Because we are treating this like a real test, you won't be able to see any specific questions. So you're not going to see specifically what you missed or what you got right. The final exam, we cannot let you look at specific questions. Your state exam, we cannot let you look at specific questions. Here's the deal, you guys. The questions you're getting ready to see on the midterm, you're never going to see again. So studying those specific questions aren't going to help you. However, after you take your midterm, what you have is and what you and I will both get is a report. And it'll give you a breakdown of the topics. So it'll tell you your score on agency. It'll tell you your score on contracts. It'll tell you your score on land use control. So if you bomb that section, that's the section you need to go back and review. If you knock the top out of agency, still review it to keep it fresh, but maybe all your study time doesn't need to be on agency. Does that make sense? The report is the helpful thing, because the report shows you your areas of weakness and what you need to focus on from the first half of the class to get ready for this test. So somebody asked, will we have till Monday? Yes, you have. It's live right now. I'm getting ready to show you where it is. I asked that you guys not take it during class because I would consider that a distraction. And everybody has until next Monday to take it. It's a one-time link. What if you don't get to answer all the questions in the time frame? An unanswered question is a missed point. An unanswered question means you get that point. Again, you guys, I'm not looking for pass or fail. Does everybody hear me? I'm not looking for pass or fail for the midterm. I'm looking at it as a checkpoint to see where are you right now? Where are you right now? So this is why I need you guys to devote that 2 hours. Because if you get distracted, if you don't finish it, your clock keeps ticking. So I need you guys to be devoted to that 2 hours. You know, shut your office door, put your do not disturb sign up to let the family know you're taking that test. that midterm. This is required. You and I, like I said, will both get an email with a report that shows me that you tried, and that's what I'm looking for. And I hope you use that report to your advantage to help you identify your areas of weakness, to use it as a checkpoint to know where you are right now in this moment in time. And ask yourself, if I were sitting down to take the final exam, how would I do? Do you have any questions? One-time link. You're scared? Well, that's okay. That's all right. A little bit of fear never hurt anybody. By the way, the midterm, y'all forget about unit 1. Just forget about unit 1. So the midterm is 2 through 10, units 2 through 10, and 20. Don't forget 20 is our super scary environmental unit. So your midterm will cover 2 through 10 and 20. Question comes in, there's no math on your midterm. I did not include any math on your midterm. So it's just material. Remember, you guys, these are application exams. Step 1 is to know what the word means, because knowing what the word or the term or the concept means is how you need to know how to apply it in these test questions. If you don't know what the word means, you don't know how to apply it. No open books, no notes. Again, we're treating this like a real exam. You're only hurting yourself, and you're running out of time if you're trying to look up everything. You don't have time. Obviously, there's no way I can monitor that. So I just trust that we're taking this seriously. I can monitor your final exam, and I will. And we will talk about that in just a minute, so please bear with me. Midterm questions. I think it's 55 questions. That's a good one. Thank you. It's 55 questions, and you get 2 hours. Some of you may need the full 2 hours. Some of you may not. Please remember the midterm, like your final exam for this class, is delivered on a platform called Classmarker. So the email that you guys got from Lane that you use every day to access this class, it also has a little Classmarker tutorial. This kind of shows you how Classmarker works, how you can bookmark your answers, how you can save them and come back later. I do recommend that you watch the Classmarker tutorial before you take the midterm, so you can be familiar with the program. Another big advantage to the midterm is giving you exposure to Classmarker to take that scary thing out of the equation on test day. This way, with the midterm, you've all seen it, and now you know what to expect. So use your Classmarker tutorial. Anything else on the midterm before I show you where it is? Everybody understanding here what I'm saying? You have till Monday. You must try it. You must attempt it. If I don't get your results, you are not eligible for the end of class exam. I don't know how to make that any more clear. I think it's midnight, Monday night. If you're a daredevil, that means you got to start it by 10 p.m. 10:01, you only have 1 hour and 59 minutes. All right, so where's this midterm I speak of? When we look in the online learning system, and if we scroll down, you got a 50% review. Is everybody with me? A 50% review. And under the 50% review is your link to the midterm. Make sure you click on the Campbell link. So 50% review, Campbell only. You can start your midterm here. Again, please don't do it during class. We're getting ready to move on and talk about other things that you're going to be tested on. Questions, comments? We're good? The other thing I just wanted to take a minute, remind ourselves of some upcoming dates. So again, in the online learning system, if we go the whole way to the bottom, we have our own folder called Campbell. You guys are the day class. So we have your tentative schedule about what we're going to cover when. And now that we're getting closer, I just wanted to remind you, hopefully you have these dates in your calendar already. We saw these on the first day of class. But you guys have a couple opportunities for cram courses coming up. There's one on Saturday, February 25th. There's another one on Saturday, March 4th. Both are 9 to 5. Both are with Annie Rashid. These are not required. They don't count for or against your class time. If you're coming to either one or both, you're doing it for your benefit. I'm a firm believer. Well, I think I've proven my point. This is a lot of information. Have I satisfactorily proven that this is a lot of information? And I think sometimes hearing it from somebody else may help things click. So I think that's one thing that the cram course can offer you, is a different perspective to help you see things. You don't have to come to either one of these. You're welcome to come to both of them or just one. It's entirely up to you. There's no additional cost. The cost is included when you signed up for the class. So for lack of better words, let's say this thing is free. Somebody asked, will this help on our exam? Yes. It's another opportunity, another way to hear the material to help things click. We will email you Annie's Zoom link. Lane will probably send it on like February the 24th, and she'll send it again on March 3rd. So we'll send it to you, Annie's Zoom link, the day before the cram course. When somebody says you have to be here for the whole time, no. You want to come for an hour? You want to come for all day, both days? It's all optional, you guys. It's entirely up to you. We're not sending you the Annie Zoom link now, though, because between now and February 25th, you'll lose it. So our thinking of sending it the day before is it'll be at the top of your inbox. Other dates to remind you, our final exam is the last day of class, which is March 9th. The last thing we do together on March 7th, we'll talk about the rules and expectations for my exam. So the very last thing we do together on the 7th, we'll talk about the rules and expectation for my exam on the 9th. I'm not going to talk about it now, though, because then we'll have to talk about it again, and that's just time we don't have to talk about things twice. If you don't pass the exam on the 9th, if you don't pass on the 9th, but you make at least a 50%, you are eligible for the retake. The retake is March 13th. Please, again, have that date penciled in. Maybe you need it, maybe you don't. What questions do I have about retake, the cram course? Yes, my exam, you have to make a 75%. Your midterm, you have to make a 75%. to pass. Same material on both days? Yeah. Yeah, we just opened up. Yours is actually, your official one is March 4th. The February 25th is for my night class, but we figured since you guys were right here parallel, why not make both of them available to you? Give you guys a couple opportunities. But yeah, Annie does the same. What if you make less than a 50%? I don't like this doom and gloom. What if you make less than a 50%? You got to retake the class. You got to keep going until you get a 75%. You get your certificate of completion. So if you don't make a 50% the first time, or you don't make a 75% on the retake, you retake the class. Lane will let you retake it at a discount. And please don't fall into the retake trap, is what I call it. Do y'all know what the retake trap is? You know how many times I've heard retake say, I don't need to study the second time around. I already know this stuff. Well, guess what? If you knew this stuff, you wouldn't be here the second time around. So don't fall into the retake trap. Yeah. Guys, lots, and we'll talk about this with your state exam after break. These tests, my exam and your state exam, are in no way any kind of indicator about what kind of real estate agent you're going to be. We got top producers out there that have taken this class multiple times. We've got top producers out there that have taken the state exam multiple times. All we're doing with this class and the exam is proving to the real estate commission that you have the minimum competency for them to justify handing you a real estate license. What kind of agent are you going to be? I don't know. Lots of top producers have had to do this stuff more than once. My rhetorical question to you is, how badly do you want it? Because if this is something you really, really want, you will do whatever it takes to get it. I can't answer that for you. You guys need to focus on your why. Why are you here? Why do you want this? What do you hope to accomplish? Let that drive your goals. Anything else? Cram course is retake, midterm. Nobody's logged into the midterm, are you? I fear I should have done this at 1. Please don't. I still got 2 more hours, guys. Okay. All right, so let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the process for you to get your license. And we're back. So I'm going to take attendance. So now what we need to do, again, pencils are still down. This is a nice little midterm break for us. What we need to do now is talk about that process of you getting your license. And I have taken attendance, so please let me know in the chat that you're back, so we can make sure you count you here. So we have, the Real Estate Commission provided us with a booklet to walk you through the steps, the process of getting your license. Now, we're obviously not going to stand here and read this to you, but I am going to show you where the resource is, and we're going to talk about some of the specifics. Good. So the book that we're looking for, Lane emailed this to you whenever you registered. And Lane asked you to go ahead and start reading it, because as we're going to see, there's other good stuff in here too, testable stuff. Other than how you apply for your license. Since Lane emailed it to you, they have updated this booklet. So the current is always going to be in the online learning system. And when we look in the online learning system, if we look into the welcome section, and what we're looking at is the real estate licensing in North Carolina. And again, the most current one is what they just updated like last Thursday. And I will tell you the big change that they made in just a minute. It's a good change. So this is our real estate licensing in North Carolina. This is the book that says, yay, I passed Julie's class. Now what do I do? So this is the book that gets you through that process. The commission makes this available to all licensee candidates. You are welcome to contact Lane and I with questions. But do you know where we're getting our information? We're getting it from this booklet. So first off, let's understand, once you pass this class and you get your certificate of completion, you leave the hands of Carolina Real Estate School and you enter into the hands of the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. So again, this is the booklet that answers that question. Now what do I do? I'll let you guys look through this table of contents, all that good stuff. Where I want to start, different license categories. We talked about provisional status, for example, broker in charge, BIC eligible. We'll talk about this stuff in the comments. So again, looking at this book isn't just for your application. There could be some test questions on there as well. So I do encourage you to look through this. But where I want to start, the book calls it page 7. Page 7 gives you the application process. First off, let's all understand this is a process and it's got to be done in a certain order. And that's what this book tells you, is what order to do it in. All of you are currently in the throes of step 1. Step 1 is to complete a pre-licensing course and get your certificate of completion. So there's absolutely nothing else you can do right now until you finish my class. Well, that's not true. You can't submit your application until you finish this class or a pre-licensing class, but there are some things you may want to start, and that's why we're having this conversation now. So it all starts here. Once you get your certificate of completion from Lane for passing this course, then you can submit your license or submit your application to the Real Estate Commission. I will show you in just 1 minute where you start that application and where you submit that application. So we will show you that in just a second. So the commission receives your application, they review it, and they determine if you're a good candidate for a license. I'll talk about that more in just a second. Once they decide that you're a good candidate for your license, the commission will send you a notice of exam eligibility. When you get your notice of exam eligibility is when you can contact the testing service to schedule your state exam. Everybody with me so far? Finish the class, certificate of completion from Lane, submit your application. Upon approval, they send you notice of exam eligibility. Then you contact the testing center. When you pass your state exam, that's when you get your license. Please know that the testing center is not going to give you your license that day. The testing center does not issue licenses. Who issue licenses? The North Carolina Real Estate Commission. So you pass, and then the commission will mail you your license. So that's that information there. Again, step by step. Your application is good for 6 months. You got to pass both the national section and the state section within those 6 months. Failure to pass both sections within 6 months means you got to do the application process again. So you got to submit your application, resubmit that fee, all that good stuff. And you can do that again. You don't have to retake pre-licensing. Here's the deal. Your certificate of completion is good for 3 years. So you have 3 years from when you finish this class to get your license. If you don't do it within 3 years, then you got to retake pre-licensing. Y'all, please don't wait 3 years. Please don't wait 3 years. You're always going to be tested on the current material. And I promise you, things will change between now and 3 years. The sooner you can do it, the better. Obviously, we want you guys to be prepared. So your application is good for 6 months. You can do as many of those within 3 years as you can. The booklet kind of walks through the application form where you access, again, I'll show you in just 1 second, different information that is going to ask you for to complete your application. I do think that all of you can at least click on the button and see what it's about. You can start your application now and save it and go back later and finish it. But I know, or I've heard from you guys that, for example, it wants like your last 7 addresses. So if you click on it now, you can at least start gathering some of the information that it's looking for. So when you finish this class, you'll be closer to submitting it. So I do encourage all of you to at least start it, knowing you can't submit it until you're done with this class. Instructions. So it tells you what they're looking for with a legal name. It tells you what they're looking for with your social security number, So if you run into questions when you're completing the application, it's all here in the booklet. That's why this booklet is here. Part of your application does include a criminal background check. You can do it all within the online system. You don't have to go to a separate place to order your background check. You can do it all within the system. Your background check is good for 6 months. So don't order your background check now, because if you order your background check now, you've wasted a month waiting on this class to end. Does that make sense? So presumably you may want to order your background check later this month, 1st of March, if you're ready to go. It does take time to get back. How much your background check costs and how much time it takes, I cannot answer that. If you've only lived in North Carolina for the last 7 years, then you only have to get a background check for North Carolina and pay that fee. However, if you've lived in other states in the last 7 years, they're going to have to go to those states. If you've lived in other countries in the last 7 years, they're going to have to pull your background check for all those states and countries. So how long and how much depends on where you've all lived in the last 7 years. Did I say they needed your last 7 addresses? No, they needed your addresses within the last 7 years. So everywhere you've lived within the last 7 years, they're going to look at. So this is just more about what they're looking for with the background check. We talk about some states may take longer. I mean, they like call New York out. New York is known for being expensive and taking their sweet, precious time. So again, if you have New York address, if you live there in the last 7 years, you may need to just allow more time and money. All those costs will be when you order your background check. I do not have that information. If you have a blemish in your past, if you have a criminal background, there's, maybe you'll get a license, maybe you won't. It's not an automatic dismissal. They're going to review your character. They're going to ask themselves, you know, how punishable was the crime? Did you serve your debt to society? Right? Just because you have a blemish is not a guarantee that you're not going to get a license. You can still go through the process. Please do not call Lane or I and tell us what you did. I cannot tell you yeah, I get that call a lot. All you've done is just share too much information with me or Lane, because we are not the deciding factors of whether or not you can get a license or not. Is everybody with me? Lane and I do not issue licenses. If you have concerns about your past, let's see what they're talking about, what demonstrates good character. Here's what they're looking for with a criminal report. What is a character issue? So it breaks all that down for you. If you have concerns about your past, your background, you can do what's referred to as a petition for predetermination. So you can submit your background check and ask the commission, based on this, would I be a good candidate for a real estate license? So if you have any concerns, it's right here in the booklet. We've heard some stuff, y'all. Some of y'all done some crazy things. I've heard some stories shaking me to my very core. As we've been saying, your exam, there's two sections. There's a national section and there's a state section. In order to get your license, you got to pass both sections. PSI, there's your testing center. There's locations all over the state. We'll see that in just a second. Again, in order to get your license, you have to pass both sections within that 6 months, that 180 days. So let's say you go to the state or the testing center today and you pass one section and you fail another section, you only have to retake the section that you failed. So as long as you pass one section, you only have the rest of your 6 months to retake the section that you failed. This is what I need you guys to understand. Every single time you walk into PSI Testing Center, it's going to cost you $156. If you're taking both sections, it'll cost you $156. If you just have to retake one, it's going to cost you $156. This is why I want you guys to be prepared before you go, to not submit your application until you're ready, because that $156 can add up pretty quickly, right? And remember, if you don't do both within 6 months, then you got to start over with the application, background check. So that's more money. So please make sure you're ready when you go. Guys, when you finish, when you take your test on the last day of class, whatever that is, and you pass the end of class exam, we may be done, but you have to keep going. I need you guys to keep studying until you have that license in your hand, until you've passed the state exam. So many times, and look, I get it, life happens, but so many times the class ends and you guys put the book down thinking you deserve a break, which you do, but then life happens and you forget about it. And 6 months, 8 months from now, a year and a half from now, you decide it's time to revisit this license thing. Do y'all know what happens to the material if you don't touch it within 6 months or a year? Do you know where the material goes? Yeah, I don't either, but it doesn't stay here. So when you put the book down and don't keep studying this stuff, you're losing. I can't tell you how many times I get calls from former students. Julie, do you remember me? I was in your class 2 years ago, and now I'm ready to take my state exam. What do I do? If you haven't touched it in 2 years, I'm telling you right now, I'm going to email you. I'll respond, and I'm going to give you the link to my current class's YouTube channel. And I'm going to say, in a sense, you got to start over. Because again, I don't know what's going to change, but I know things will change. And we always need to make sure we're preparing for the study. So please, please, hopefully we are forming these good study habits now. So when you're done with class, when you get that certificate of completion, you can keep studying until you get that through that state exam. So $156. They give you some formats. They let you know what you can expect, the format of the question, what you can expect to see. Again, a lot of times we get asked, what can I see on my state exam? Ta-da. It breaks it down in the topics. The topics are per the syllabus. So the various topics that we're going through right now, this is like 4 units. You can expect to see about 3 questions on those 4 units. Brokerage relationships and agency contracts, these are units 7 and 8. What are we looking at? 17 in the national and 19 on the state. So to help you know where to devote your study time, to help you know where to keep your focus, you have this little guide to let you know how many questions you can expect to see on each section. How many questions you can expect to see on each section. So it'll help you allocate your study time. You can expect 8 math questions on your state exam. How much math can you see? It breaks it down for you. It tells you. The exam format, there's a test bank of like thousands of questions. And every time you go to PSI Testing Center and sit down, it's like a random shuffle. So you're not going to see the exact same exam each time you go. They have so many for agencies, so many for contracts. And whenever you sit down, there's a random shuffle. That helps keep us honest. So that way you can't run out, take your exam, and then run out the parking lot and tell me what's on it. By the way, y'all want to know the #1 problem the Real Estate Commission has with your state exam? I just alluded to it. #1 problem: cheating. Don't take all that energy you use in figuring out how to cheat and put it in this book. Because guys, once they catch you cheating, you're no longer eligible for a real estate license in the state. They frown upon that. They don't like it. So don't do it. Let's see. Number of questions. Your national section has 80 questions. Your state section has 40. Also, at your state exam, you're going to have test the test questions, which are these pre-test questions. You're going to have a handful of questions in each section that don't count for or against you. You will never know if it's a test the test question or not. What you're doing is vetting test questions for future candidates. Past candidates vetted questions for you guys. So in other words, before they release them, they run them through this vetting process to make sure that they're good questions. So you'll have some of those test the test that don't count for or against you. You'll be none the wiser. To pass each section, you got to make a 57 out of 80 for the national, 29 out of 40 for the state section. Here's how you apply once you get that notice of exam eligibility. Remember our process. So once you get the notice for exam eligibility, then you contact the testing center to schedule your exam. The big change to this book that was made as of last Wednesday, February 1st, the exam is at a testing center only. They did allow you to take it at home online until February 1st. And I'm telling you right now, it was not good. It was not good. There were test candidates that were having technical difficulties. Maybe something happened to their computer. Maybe something happened to the computer at PSI, but your clock didn't stop ticking with technical difficulties. And there were candidates that were losing their test, thus losing that $156. How many of you are in the habit of reading with your mouth moving? You read a test question and you move your mouth. Yeah, the online, they popped you for that. They gave you a warning. And then if they saw it again, they removed you from your test. There were a lot of things online that weren't favorable. It's no longer an option. This is a good thing. effective February 1st, your only option to take your state exam is to go to a testing center, to go to a PSI testing center. And we got them in Asheville, Charlotte, Fayetteville, Greenville, Raleigh, Wilmington, and Winston. So you'll go to whichever testing center. Online is no longer an option, which is a really good thing for you guys. I didn't hear a single positive. I think they tried it for about a year and a half, and I didn't hear a single positive thing about it. So let's take that fear out of it and just go, which, by the way, this is a testing center, which means you may be sitting next to somebody taking their CPA license exam, or you may be sitting next to somebody going for their CNA, right? They're not just giving the real estate exam, they're offering all sorts of licensees exams. So this is how you contact PSI once you get that notice of exam eligibility, once you go through that process. Here's how you can schedule online scheduling. They give you like little prompts, step-by-step tutorial. So you can look at that once you get your notice of exam eligibility. Special accommodations for candidates with disabilities. If you do have a documented disability, PSI will work with you. So please make sure you look at this to follow the instructions when you're ready to schedule. So PSI can accommodate. Make those accommodations. Here's your arrival and check-in process. What you can expect when you get there, what they require, certain identifications, what they need to see. They're not quite patting you down yet, but they're pretty strict. They're pretty tight. So for example, I've heard some locations will give you like a little locker and you got to empty your pockets. You can't take anything with you in there. So, you know, make sure you know what to expect when they get there, what you can finish up, or what you can, you know what to expect. Here's your security, taking the exam, da-da-da. You get 2.5 hours for the national section and an hour and a half for the state. Once your clock starts in each section, it doesn't stop. So if you want to take a break in your national section, your clock keeps going. However, you do get a break between each sections. So once you finish the national and before you start the state, the recommendation is that you take a break. Everybody with me? But if you get up and take a break in the middle of a section, your clock does not stop. So I would plan that accordingly. Goes through the process about rescheduling. There's that $156 again. Excused absences, inclement weather. What happens when you do pass, how you're going to get your license. Talking about you guys being provisional brokers, inactive provisional brokers. Again, this is stuff we're going to talk about in the comments. License, law, and commission rule. But you have another resource for this as well. Good testable material. Renewing. We're going to talk about renewing your license, what it means to have an active license or an inactive license. That comes in our license, law, and commission rule section as well. So again, you guys, looking at this book could not only help you know what to do once you pass this class, but it could also help you get through the class. Post-licensing and CE, we've danced around those a little bit. We'll talk about those when we get to license, law, and commission rule. So yeah. It's a process. And I think that's the first thing for us to understand is that this is a process. And the commission's going to want to make sure you do it. I mean, obviously, you can't do one before you do others. So you got to go and order the process. I'm getting a couple questions. We have access to PowerPoints after we pass your class, and we'll have access to this booklet after we pass your class. You guys will still have the online learning system for, I think it's 4 months after this class. So when we finish in March, you will still be able to log on to the online learning system and get everything for 4 months. If you need it for longer than 4 months, just call Lane. She's happy to grant you more than 4 months, but she's not a mind reader. So let her know you need it more than 4 months and she'll be happy to extend it for you. So yes, you'll have access to PowerPoints, everything in here. This is not going to go away. What other questions do I have about the state? We're not talking about my exam. This is just the state exam. What questions do we have about your state exam? So where do you go? Well, it all starts at ncrec.gov, North Carolina Real Estate Commission's website. If you don't remember the website, then just Google North Carolina Real Estate Commission. It's bound to come up. There are 8 math questions on your state exam per the book. So ncrec.gov. I'm on the home page. Everybody see me? I'm on the home page. And when you scroll the whole way to the bottom, or close to the bottom, there's a button that says apply for a license. It all starts here. There is no reason why any one of you can't, after class at 1 o'clock, click on this button and see what they're looking for. Start gathering that information. So when you pass in March, you'll be that step closer. Again, I know some of you are more ready to go than the others. So some of you may want to start your application now, order your background check closer to class. Some of you may want to wait until you get your certificate of completion. I can't tell you what to do. Those are decisions for you guys to make. There's no wrong way to do it. You just got to understand going into it, the 6 months certificate of completion is good for 3 years, blah, blah, blah. But it all starts here. For both my exam and your state exam, you know your results immediately. Brace yourselves. You're going to hit submit. It's going to say, are you sure? You say yes. Bam, pass or fail. You're still sitting there trying to process the fact that you finished taking the test, and you're going to know your score. So you don't have to wait. Lane's been licensed so long, she had to wait for her scores to be mailed to her. She had to run out to the mailbox every day. See how far we've come? I love it when Lane tells that story. I've been licensed so long, we didn't have this fancy online application. I still mailed a paper application in. See how much we're changing? But at least I knew my score right away. I have no problem telling you guys the first time I went to the state exam, I failed. It's a tough test. It's a lot of information. It was a bad day, not gonna lie. It was a bad day, but you know what? Have your little pity party. It's okay. Have your little pity party. But then you got to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and go back and try it again. If you really, really want it. One of you told me earlier, you know somebody that's taken this class 11 times. I know dude took this state exam 8 times. You know what? Once again, I'll say these tests are no indicator about what kind of real estate agent you're going to be. I don't know if you're going to be good or not. I have no idea. All these tests do is prove to the commission that you have the minimum competency for them to justify handing you a license. Please remember, this is the beginning of your training. This is the beginning of your learning. Lots more to come once you get your license. So when you do get your license, they'll mail it to you. Get you a nice document frame, hang it proud. You know what? I worked hard for this thing. So I keep it on my wall where I can look at it. Hobby Lobby puts document on frames on sale often. Y'all know Hobby Lobby. If it's not on sale this week, go back next and it will be on sale, right? So get you a nice document frame and display this thing, because when they mail it to you, you're going to want to be proud. Eye on the prize. What questions do I have? Comments or concerns? So again, in the welcome section, Relink booklet, February of 2023. Whatever you got, an email from Lane when you registered is old, it's out of date. And again, the big update, they're not offering online testing anymore, which is really good. Everybody good? Click on the button, hit the button, apply for a license, just to get started, just to gather what they need. Like you said, you can start and save your work and go back to it. All right. Second half of the class. Now we get into financing. Units 14 and 15 are our financing units, both lumped together. This unit, we're going to talk about the principles. In unit 15, we're going to talk about the more in practice, the day-to-day. Guys, when we're in units 14 and 15, the key, the trick to these units, part of the trick, I want everybody to take your real estate agent hat off, and I want you to put your mortgage lender hat on. In order to get through these, we got to think like a lender. And I think these two units, students tend to struggle because first off, you thought you were signing up for a real estate class. You didn't think you were signing up for a mortgage lending class. But it is important that we understand the basics behind the mortgage lending process because we're the front lines when working with buyers and sellers. We're generally one of the first ones that they call. And maybe we can assist them. Maybe we need to have them talk to their lender. But we are generally the front line. So it's important that we have this understanding of how a lending process works. Everybody have your hat on? Is it secure? Is it tight? All right, welcome to mortgage lending school. No, I'm just kidding. By the way, if you're interested, they got a whole different licensing, a whole different exam. It's a whole similar, different process. I do suggest one at a time. So you're currently going for your real estate license, do that, and then you can worry about getting your lending license. Fair enough? One at a time, right? All right, so in 14, our guide, our roadmap, we're going to talk about a couple different type of theory states. We're going to talk about a title theory state and a lien theory state. We're going to talk about the promissory note, what that does. We're also going to talk about the deed of trust and what that does. I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of insight. In North Carolina, we're awfully fancy, and what we call the mortgage is the deed of trust. So the two sometimes are used interchangeably. I'm telling you guys right now, you do not have the proper definition of mortgage in your head. So I have to undo that when we talk about the mortgage. And then because units 14 and 15 are our finance units, that means we got lots of math to do. 14, 15. After 15, we do unit 21. 14, 15, or 21 are our big math units. So grab your calculators. Hopefully you've had time to do unit 3 math, unit 4 math, and unit 8 math, because now we're moving into 14, 15, and 21 with math. So we're going to calculate discount points, loan origination fees. We're going to amortize a loan. We're going to figure out interest over the life of the loan. Talk about loan to value ratio. Lots of fun math. So starting on page 364, let's just define some words. Mortgage is not what you think it is. Mortgage is the pledge of real estate as security. Some states call it a mortgage. North Carolina calls it a deed of trust. It is the same thing. Just depend on what state you're standing in is what we call it. The parties to the mortgage are the mortgagor and the mortgagee. Remember our little chart back on page 86 when we first defined ORs and EEs? You can find that there. The mortgagor is the giver of the mortgage or the borrower. Mortgagor, borrower. The mortgagee is the lender. The borrower is giving the security. They're pledging the property as security to the lender. I'm here to tell you right now, the lender is fine and dandy with you until you stop making payments. Then it becomes a problem. And that's what the lender cares about. As long as you're making payments, lender's fine. But the lender wants to know, if this person stops making payments, what do I have? What can I do to get my money back? And what the lender has is the mortgage. They have that pledge. Failure to make payments may eventually result in the lender taking the property, process known as foreclosure that we'll talk about, take the property so they can sell it so they can get their money back. So the mortgagor is the borrower. You guys hear? Mortgagor, borrower. The mortgagee is the lender. Equitable title is what the borrower gets. Equitable title allows possession. It allows use of the pledged property. The lender has an interest. They allow the borrower to possess the property. They allow them to live there. You want to make a profit from it. Maybe you want to tenant or something. When I say the lender has an interest, let's say that lenders get a bad rap, and I don't understand why, because they charge me interest. Well, yeah, you went marching in the bank demanding $300,000. If somebody asked to borrow $300,000 from you, don't you want them to pay you back with interest? So the lender, why wouldn't they charge you interest? Because you're borrowing their money. But here's the deal. Let's say you are buying this house, $300,000. And you say you're going to put down 10,000. I'm sorry, 10%. So you're buying this house, you're bringing $30,000 to the transaction. How much are you asking the lender for? Purchase price is 300, you're bringing 30. How much are you asking the lender for? Who has the biggest interest in this property? I mean, your little $30,000 is cute, don't get me wrong. But seriously, who has the biggest interest in this property? It's the lender. They've got $270,000 invested in it, invested in you. And that's what the lender's about, is protecting their investment. I think when we think about people not making their mortgage payment with people for whatever reason, and life happens, I get it. It's not intentional that you're not making those payments. But I think when we think of people going in default when they fail to make payments, we tend to think of them being in the home 6 years, 8 years, 10 years. Guys, there have been cases where the borrower never made their first mortgage payment. Never made their first mortgage payment. And that's what the lender has to ask themselves. If I need to sell this house today, can I sell it for $270,000 to get my money back? So the default, this is when the borrower fails to make payment, we're not in foreclosure yet. But when you've defaulted, you stopped, you failed to make a payment. And then hypothecation is the act of pledging property as security. So the hypothecation is the act of pledging your property as security. The lender needs to know that you are just as committed as they are. On page 364, we talk about a lien theory state. A lien theory state is a two-party interest, which just means we have the mortgagor, who's the borrower, and the mortgagee, who's the lender. Only two parties involved in a lien theory state. The document used to pledge is the mortgage. In a lien theory state, the document used to pledge the property is called the mortgage. In lien theory states, the borrower gets both the legal title and the equitable title. They get the deed and they get possession. The foreclosure process in a lien theory state is known as the judicial foreclosure process. The judicial foreclosure process means we got to go stand in front of a judge to get this process started. The judge handles foreclosures in lien theory states. The judicial foreclosure process is timely, it's expensive. North Carolina is not a lien theory state. North Carolina is not a lien theory state. So what is North Carolina? We are a title theory state. In a title theory state, there are three parties. There is the grantor, who is the mortgagor, borrower. There's the beneficiary, who is the lender. And then there's this third party, that's the trustee, which is going to be an attorney that's going to handle the affairs of the beneficiary in the event of the borrower's default. So if the borrower defaults, the trustee kicks in and handles things on their behalf. The instrument, the document that we use is called the deed of trust. Other states call it a mortgage. We call it deed of trust. You may see it interchangeably on your exams, national section, for example. So that's a big part of knowing where we are, is knowing that the mortgage is the deed of trust. What you call it depends on what state you're in. In a title theory state, the borrower gets equitable title, which means they get possession. They get permission to live there. The trustee hangs on to the legal title on behalf of the beneficiary. And in the event of the borrower's default, we don't have to go through this long, elaborate judicial process. In North Carolina, we have something called the power of sale foreclosure. Whoa, what was that? Fast forward, right? In North Carolina, we have something called the power of sale foreclosure, which means in the event of foreclosure, the trustee has the power to sell the property on behalf of the beneficiary, on behalf of the lender. In North Carolina, when you get a loan, part of all that stuff you're agreeing to is to agree to allow the trustee to begin the power of sale foreclosure process in the event of your default. How many payments do you have to miss before they start the foreclosure? It just depends on your agreement with the lender. There's no across the board. Maybe they'll only let you miss 2, maybe they'll let you miss 12. It's all part of your agreement with the lender that we're getting ready to talk about. So other states, and I don't know what other states may be a lien theory state. North Carolina is a title theory state. There's going to be 2 instruments, 2 documents in North Carolina, well, anywhere with getting a loan. The financing instrument is the promissory note. Think of the promissory note as the IOU. The promissory note is the contractual agreement between the borrower and the lender. The promissory note is when the borrower and the lender determine how much is due when, what happens if I stop payment, how many payments do I have to miss before you start the foreclosure. The promissory note is the bilateral contract between the lender and the borrower. The other instrument, the other document is our mortgage or deed of trust. This is a security instrument. This is the document. The security instrument is the document that pledges the property to the lender as collateral. The security instrument is the one that gets recorded to protect the lender's interest. The promissory note does not get recorded. Connor Act requires that the mortgage or the deed of trust gets recorded. Questions so far? Okay, let's take a break. We come back, we'll put our mortgage lender hat back on. Keep going in unit 14. And we're back. Cameras are on. And I can see twofold. So I am taking attendance. And we're going to put our mortgage lender hat back on for another hour. 56 minutes. So we talked about the promissory note, again, the IOU, the bilateral contract between the lender and the borrower. The other document, the other instrument is known as the mortgage in some states, or deed of trust in others, including North Carolina. The deed of trust is what gets recorded. The deed of trust, that's why it's a security instrument. It secures the lender's investment. If the borrower tries to sell the property out from underneath the lender, this is going to show up in the attorney's search, knowing that there's a lien on the property. Remember, mortgages are specific liens. Y'all remember specific liens? Specific liens attached to what? Specific liens attached to, why don't we do a chat for that? Make sure we're all back. Specific liens attaches to what? Yep, we're good. Specific liens attached to the property. Specific liens are specific to that property. Compare those to general liens. General liens attached to the person. So the mortgage is one of those liens, that attaches specifically to the property. So the way the lender can protect their interest, the way they can secure their interest, is by recording this deed of trust. So now what we're going to do on page 366 is talk about the essential elements of a deed of trust. Remember our previous essential element conversations. We've talked about essential elements of the deed. We've talked about essential elements of a valid contract. Now we're going to talk about essential elements of a deed of trust, which again, what the judge is looking for to determine its validity. The deed of trust has to refer to the promissory note. Remember, the promissory note is the IOU. The promissory note is the bilateral agreement between the borrower and the lender. So the deed of trust has to refer to the promissory note. The deed of trust has to state that it is security. Again, as long as you're making your payments, the lender doesn't have a problem with you. The problem comes when you stop making your payments, when you're in default. And that's why it has to state that this is security in the event you stop or the borrower stops making their payments. The deed of trust is going to have the name of the lender and the borrower, mortgagor and mortgagee. It's going to have a legal description of the property. Deed of trust is in writing by signed all parties per the statute of frauds. Deed of trust is recorded per the Connor Act. And then the deed of trust is delivered to and accepted by the trustee. Remember, the trustee is the third party, the attorney that handles the affairs on behalf of the beneficiary, also known as the lender. Because there are bilateral agreements, because these are two-way streets, both parties have duties and obligations to each other. So let's first start talking about the obligations of the borrower. Their number one obligation is to do what? Make that payment every month. What did you agree to when you took that loan? When you took that loan, you agreed to how much you were going to pay every month for the life of the loan. The borrower is responsible for keeping up with property taxes. The borrower is responsible for maintaining homeowners insurance. Where are my homeowners on the call? You guys know you probably don't pay your own taxes every year, do you? You guys know you don't pay your homeowners insurance every year, do you? The lender handles that for you, and we will talk about why. It's more than just because they're nice guys. We'll talk about why they pay your taxes on your behalf, why they pay your homeowners insurance on your behalf. It's still the obligation of the borrower to ensure that that happens, to maintain homeowners insurance. The borrower needs to maintain the property. Remember, who has the biggest interest when we start and well into home ownership? You're bringing 10% of the purchase price. That means the lender's bringing the other 90. So in order to protect the lender's interest, the borrower needs to maintain the property. And then there's probably a provision in the promissory note that says we need lender authorization before any making major alterations or flat out demolition, just flatten the property. So the obligations of the borrower. We also have the rights of the borrower. They have the right to live there. They have the right to use the property. They want to rent it out to tenants and collect rent. They have that right. You want to plant an orchard in your side yard and grow oranges? You have that right. You have the right to possess and use the property without interference from the lender, as long as you're not destroying it. The right of defeasance says that once you make that last payment, the deed of trust becomes null and void. So the right of defeasance says once the lender's paid in full, you're done with the lender. Once they collect all their money, their interest is no more, right? So how do you do away with the lender? We got two choices. You either buy the house for cash, $300,000 of cash, good for you if you can do that, or you pay the lender off if you do have to buy with a loan. And then the right of redemption says, we'll talk a little bit more about this. This is about the foreclosure process. Before the bank takes the property, the borrower may have the right to redeem themselves, to save themselves from foreclosure. Again, talking a little bit more about that in just a minute. Since it is a bilateral agreement, it's a two-way street. There's rights of the lender. The lender has the right to assign the debt. They have the right to service the loan. You guys remember what an assignment is? An assignment says all the terms stay the same. The only thing that changes is the name of one of the parties. So if the lender is referred to as servicing the loan, if the lender services the loan, they've sold it to another lender. Why do they do that? We'll talk about that on Thursday in Unit 15. The other right of the lender is to take the property back, is to foreclose on the borrower. If the borrower stops making payments, the lender has the right to foreclose on the property, take the property back so they can sell it and get their money back. Foreclosure is a legal process. That's why in North Carolina, we have the trustee, the attorney involved. Remember, in North Carolina, we have that power of sale foreclosure. We don't have to go through this big lengthy court process. The borrower agrees to allow the trustee to start the foreclosure process in the event of their default in their promissory note. We don't have to have a judge intervene. We don't have to have a judge say it's okay to start the foreclosure process. the borrower agrees to all this in the promissory note. If I stop making payments after X amount of missed payments, the lender has the right to foreclose. That's what the power of sale. It's a foreclosure. So talking about our different methods of foreclosure, again, it kind of depends on what state you're standing in. Lien theory states that use the judicial foreclosure process, again, a very lengthy, often expensive process. The document used in the judicial foreclosure process is the sheriff's deed. I always remember it this way. If the judge takes the property, who are they sending to take the property? They're going to go out them themselves and take it? No, they're going to send the sheriff. So because the judge is taking the property, we're going to use the sheriff's deed in our judicial foreclosure state. Not the what was that? Non-judicial foreclosure, that's a hard word. North Carolina is a power of sale foreclosure state, which is a non-judicial. Again, we have a third party already incorporated per our promissory note. That third party is the trustee, which is an attorney. So you already have them involved. And in North Carolina, in the event of the borrower's default, the trustee needs to go to a very small, quick hearing in front of the judge to get it started, but it's not near as lengthy, near as costly as judicial foreclosure. In North Carolina, if you're losing the property for foreclosure, power of sale foreclosure, that property is going to convey to the lender using a trustee's deed, because that's the person that's doing it, the trustee, that third party. Some states, not North Carolina, but some states may use a strict foreclosure. In a strict foreclosure, the judge establishes a period of time. The judge says, looks at the borrower and says, if you can come up with the whole note due by X date, we don't have to go through this. We do not do this in North Carolina. We're a non-judicial foreclosure state. Remember back in Unit 3 when we were talking about liens, and specifically we were talking about lien priorities. And we said with lien priorities, you always have your superior liens. Our superior liens are our real property taxes and our government special assessments. Superior liens are always paid first. All other liens are paid in the order in which they're recorded, except for the mechanics lien. That's paid in the order in which the work began. Unit 3. In a foreclosure, the lien priority changes just a little bit. So in a foreclosure, the lien priority looks a little different. In a foreclosure, the cost of the sale of the foreclosure is paid first. So if the trustee has to go to the court to do a quick appearance in front of the judge to get this process started, paying the trustee, all of the costs of the sale of the foreclosure are paid first. Then superior liens. Superior liens are our real property taxes and our government special assessments. Then we pay the deed of trust because the lender is the one that originated all this. All other liens are paid in the order in which we're recorded, except for the mechanics lien. It's paid in the order in which the work began. And if, and I'm stressing the word if, once everybody else has been paid off, if there's any money left, Whatever's left goes to the borrower. Here's the deal. Lien holders cannot collect any more than what they're owed. So if there's any money paid out after the trustee's been paid, superior liens, deed of trust, and all of the liens, once everybody else has been paid, if there's anything left, then the surplus goes to the borrower. Do you remember we said earlier in my homeowners on the call, most of you, there may be some exceptions. But remember earlier we said that your the payment that you send into the lender every month, we're going to break this down a little bit more. But part of the payment that you send in are taxes and homeowners insurance. Annual taxes, for example, are divided by 12. And that 12 is added to the payment you send in the lender every month. Your annual homeowners insurance is divided by 12. And so that 12 that you pay every month is paid into the homeowners insurance. The lender is collecting a 12th of the taxes and a 12th of the homeowners insurance from you each month. So when those bills come due, they can pay on your behalf. My homeowners on the call know that once a year you get a letter from the county that says your taxes have been paid. And you think, well, gee, that's nice. I don't have to worry about it. And once a year you get an email or a letter from your insurance company that says your homeowner's insurance has been renewed for another year. Well, isn't that nice? I didn't have to do anything. Thank you, lender, for taking care of paying my taxes for me. Thank you, lender, for renewing my homeowner's insurance. The lender doesn't do it for you. They do it to protect themselves. It sure is a nice perk, but they don't do it for you. What if you decide, the lender let you be responsible for paying taxes, and you decide you're not going to pay taxes anymore? So you didn't pay 2022 taxes. You don't feel like paying 2023 taxes. You really don't feel like paying 2024 taxes. Eventually, the county is going to come after you to collect their back debt and taxes. Everybody with me so far? And if the county has to foreclose on you to collect their backlog of taxes, do you think that the county is worried about selling the property to get their money back and the lender's money back and the other lien holders' money back? Do you think the county cares about the lender getting their money back? Who's the county care about? Them getting their money back. So the reason that they pay your taxes on your behalf, because they know where they stand. The lender knows where they stand in this lien priority. And they know that they are number three down the line. So by paying those taxes on your behalf, they know that the county can't foreclose. Similar with insurance. If you're not paying homeowners insurance and lightning strikes the house, what's to stop the homeowner, the borrower, from just driving off into the sunset, leaving the property abandoned, again, without any protection for the lender? So why they pay these bills in your behalf is to protect themselves. Be aware, when you pay that loan off, your letters are going to look different. Now you're going to get a letter from the county that says, this is how much in tax you owe me this year. Now you're going to get a letter from State Farm that says, this is how much in homeowners insurance you owe. Once you pay that loan off, you're done. You've severed ties with the lender. They're no longer involved. You're not sending them money in every month. Thus, they're no longer paying those bills on your behalf. Once you pay that loan off, it's suggested that you still set some money aside for taxes and insurance, because that first year might hurt. Most lenders will pay taxes and insurance on the borrower's behalf, but not all. All lenders are different. And they may have a policy where they allow you to pay your own taxes and insurance. Questions, comments? Lenders may offer borrowers a redemption period before the foreclosure process. A redemption period is your opportunity to redeem yourself. If you're redeeming yourself, you're saving yourself. And in this case, what you're trying to save yourself from is foreclosure. Other states have an equity of redemption period, which means you have the opportunity to save yourself before the foreclosure sale. North Carolina uses a statutory redemption, which means after the foreclosure sale, you may still save yourself. After the foreclosure sale, the borrower has 10 days to come up with the note, to come up with the whole note due. And if they can come up with the whole note due after the sale, then they have redeemed themselves. They can save themselves from foreclosure. There's a nice little picture in your book on 368 that talks about the different redemption periods. Foreclosures stay on a borrower's credit for 7 years. That means anytime you apply for a loan, that's going to follow you, that's going to come up. I'm not here to tell you whether or not you can get loan approval for not just a house, but a car, for example, any type of loan. Maybe you can, maybe you not. I can't, I'm not a lender. But if you can save yourself that foreclosure, if you can redeem yourself from that foreclosure, I mean, all you got to do is come up with the whole note due. Easier said than done, right? If not, this foreclosure is going to follow the borrower around for 7 years. Lenders may also have something called a deficiency judgment. If foreclosure process is not enough to pay the liens, if foreclosure process is not enough to pay the debt, the lien holder may file a deficiency judgment. A deficiency judgment is a general lien. What did we just say the general lien attached to? Let me see your mouse move. What did we just say the general lien attached to? The person. So deficiency judgment, the lender will collect. How's it going to collect? How are they going to collect? They file this deficiency judgment, which means anytime you apply for a loan, maybe it's a home loan, maybe it's a car loan, maybe it's a loan to do some kind of improvement, any kind of loan, this deficiency judgment is going to pop up, and you probably won't get loan approval until you pay off these creditors. We will talk shortly about something called seller financing. What we need to know right now, seller financing cannot do a deficiency judgment. The seller, if they are financing and we go in default, because the seller is already in the lien priority line anyway. They're already in line as a lien holder. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about seller financing. I think we'll see that in Unit 15 next week, or Thursday. A possible alternative to foreclosure is our short sale. We talked about our short sale earlier today when we looked at our short sale addendum. Short sales are generally better for the borrower. We just said a foreclosure will follow you around for 7 years. A short sale only sticks with you for 3. So you don't have as much time. In order for it to even be considered a short sale, it's got to have these 3 pieces. That's what you're looking at right here. So in order for it to even be considered, we have to first determine that the seller's underwater, which means they owe more than what they can sell the home for. In addition to being underwater, the seller doesn't have sufficient liquid assets to make up the difference. In other words, they can't sell their stocks and bonds. They can't drain their savings account. That's what we mean by liquid assets. Money that is easily converted to cash. So you're underwater, you owe more than it's worth, and you don't have sufficient liquid assets to make up the difference. Those are the first 2 pieces. The third piece of the short sale is that the lien holders have to agree to participate. There are no guarantees. And what the lien holders are agreeing to is to release their lien upon receiving less than what they're owed. The lien holders all have to agree to take a loss. And in order for this to go as a short sale, all lien holders have to agree. If one doesn't agree, then the short sale doesn't go through, and the seller will probably have to do foreclosure. We got to get everybody on board to do these. Again, they're easier for the borrower, doesn't attach to them as long as the foreclosure. However, bottom line, if we're going to do this or not is up to the lien holder. So this is the way this works. Seller puts their home on the market and they advertise a short sale potential. We have no idea if the short sale is going to go through or not. So they advertise as a short sale potential. Buyer and seller negotiate the offer like they always do. How much is the buyer willing to pay? The seller accepts, due diligence, earnest money, all the terms of the offer still apply. And the buyer and the seller agree to those terms like they always do. That piece has not changed. Once we have a contract in place with the short sale addendum, once we have that contract in place, then and only then will the lien holders start their process to determine if they're going to approve this or not. Lien holders aren't going to look at this until they have a bona fide buyer, a legitimate contract in their hand. Does this make sense? I mean, you could call the lien holder and say, if I sell my house for X amount, what's that mean for you? Lien holder is not going to talk to you until they know they have a buyer with a contract in their hand saying, this is how much I'm willing to pay for this house. So we go under contract and we have a short sale contingency. And that contingency is for the seller. And what that contingency says is that if I don't get all the lien holders' approval, I can't sell you my house. What do I need to do before I sell you my house? I got to get all of the lien holders' approval. If one says no, we got to terminate, and the seller's probably facing foreclosure. I mentioned earlier, do not let the name of these things fool you. Short sale has absolutely nothing to do with the time these things take. They say on average, from contract to close, you can expect 6 months. Some will be less, some will be more. I've done 2 of these as a buyer's agent. My first short sale was 4 months. My second short sale, 11 and a half months. We were under contract for 11 and a half months. And guys, I'm telling you from personal experience, the name of the game with short sales is patience. I cannot call the seller's lien holders and say, why won't you give us approval? Why won't you move faster? What do you need to do? Both agents, listing and buyer's agents, seller and buyer, are patiently waiting to see that we get the lien holder's response. If all of the lien holders approve it, then the buyer goes on and starts their due diligence. Then they go on and start their inspections and investigations. We're not going to have them spend a lot of money while we're waiting to see if the lien holder is even going to approve this or not. We are literally sitting there waiting on the phone to ring until we get those lien holders' approvals. A lot of the times with short sales were multiple liens. You may have a first mortgage, a second mortgage, outstanding liens. It's all the lien holders of the property that have to agree to do this. My 11 and a half month, they had two mortgages on the property. They had a failed startup business that was a lien on the property. They had outstanding debt to the IRS that was a lien on the property. I don't know how familiar you are with the IRS, but I'm telling you, they're not known for their rapid response, right? So we had to wait patiently 11 and a half months. It got approved. They bought the house. They still live there. They're very good friends of mine. Be careful about doing business with family and friends. That was a rough year for us. We're all cool again, by the way. We're friends again. It's all good. No, I'm just kidding. It's a long time and it's a process. And when you guys get involved in one of these, you need to be very familiar with the short sale addendum, because the short sale addendum walks you through the specifics of these. Foreclosures and short sales were very common. We had a period of time known as the housing market crash. Housing market crash was like 08, 09, 2010, in that period. In real estate during that time, times were tough. Times were really, really tough. And foreclosures and short sales were everywhere. It was hard not to do a transaction that wasn't a foreclosure or a possible short sale. So we all had to educate ourselves. I remember my real estate firm, we had an attorney come into our sales meeting and go over short sales with us, help educate us on the process. I fear, if I may whip out my crystal ball for a second, I fear part of the consequences of this crazy market that we're trying to get out of, I fear we might see foreclosures and short sales again in the near future. Probably not like what we did in the housing market crash, but I have a feeling that some of the consequences of buyers overpaying, in some cases $100,000 more than asking price, there's got to be consequences to that. And I fear as the market starts correcting, we're going to start seeing another run of foreclosures and short sales. So you guys that are about getting your license, you may get to see these sooner than you think. They're common today. They're going to be more common, my personal opinion. Now we have attorneys but coming back to offices and explaining this to us again, because it's been what, 12, 13 years since the housing market crash. So what questions do I have on short sales or foreclosures? Is this because the lender's giving out loans to people that do not qualify? Oh, no. This is buyers paying more than the asking price. The common misconception the last couple of years is that the sellers were greedy and they were asking for way too much money. You know what? The majority of sellers were listing appropriately. But now you got buyers in multiple offer situations. Like I said, you guys, there were cases where the buyer's offering $100,000 more than the purchase price. That's not the seller driving it up, is it? That's the buyer. They're trying to be competitive. Remember, one weekend I was on the market, my team member was on the market, resulted in 45 offers. All buyers had to figure out what they were going to do to make their offer stand out. And you know what talks the loudest? Money. How do you get your offer to stand out? Offer the seller lots of money. So now you got all these, not all of them, but now you got buyers paying more than what the property is worth. They're starting underwater. They're starting owing more than the property's worth because that's the loan that they took. If they were approved, of course, they still had to get approval. It's been a crazy last couple of years. It's been a crazy ride. And I'm glad we're starting to see. I think I asked this before, but did I have anybody try to buy a house within the last 2 or 3 years, or successfully buy a house in the last 2 to 3 years? If you know, you know. My team leader is celebrating like 35 years in the industry this year. And she said that this market we're coming out of is the craziest market she has ever seen in 35 years. So what are going to be the consequences to this market? I don't know for sure, but I do know when this is you guys are getting started and getting your license. You know what? Every market has its own unique set of challenges. The key is to stay on top of it. Other questions or comments? Foreclosure, short sale? So when it comes to foreclosures and short sales, what's our responsibility? Where do we stand in it? Mortgage hat, lender half off for a second. Let's put our agent hat back on just for 1 second. If you are listing a property that's a short sale potential, that's a material fact that we have to disclose. Buyers have the right to know before they purchase, before they even present an offer, that it's a possible short sale. So short sale potential is a material fact. Listing agents, you are the one that's communicating with the seller. The seller is the one that's in default. The seller is the borrower with their loans. So listing agents are generally communicating with the sellers, or are communicating with the sellers. And the first thing is you need to do as a listing agent when you feel you might have a short sale potential coming up is to tell your seller to call their attorney and to call their accountant. Those are our 2 CYAs. Call your attorney and call your accountant. As the selling agent, you know, because it's advertised as a potential short sale. So you need to have a discussion with your buyer about this process. Again, once you start using forms, the short sale addendum is a really good one to explain what's going on. You do not need to read the form now. You'll see it when you get into post licensing. When you get in the real world, the first time you get up with a short sale, sit down and read the form so you can explain to your clients about what's going on. Questions? By the way, once all the lien holders approve the short sale, they send written notice, or the seller gets written notice, and then the seller calls the buyer's agent, or the listing agent calls the buyer's agent and says we have approval, which now the buyer can start their due diligence. Now the buyer can start their inspections and investigations. Do you ever have a moment in your life where you always know where you were when this happened? Maybe it was a cultural moment. In my case, it was the phone call from the listing agent after 11.5 months that said, we got the approval. I was driving down the road. I will never forget that phone call. So I've been waiting for that call for 11 2.5 months. My buyers, my friends really wanted that house. That's all I have to say. He joked with me, I just saw them last week, and he joked with me about, hey, we want to sell. And I said, no, you're not. You're going to stay there. You're going to live there. You're going to be happy because of everything that we went through to get it. He's like 6'4". I'm like 5'3", you know, but I told him this is what we're going to do. Questions, foreclosure or short sale? So different ways that the seller can pay off their mortgage when they go to sell. Remember, the seller in their transaction is the borrower. So if the seller has a loan, they're the borrower. If your buyer is getting a new loan, then they're the borrower in that transaction. Does that make sense? So if the buyer's getting a loan and the seller already has a loan, they're both borrowers. It's just depending on which lender you're talking to. Outstanding debt with the seller, new loan with the buyer. So when the seller goes to sell, they have a couple possibilities of paying their loan off. And the first one is the most common one and the one that we see the most often, but it's not in your book. And I don't know why. So I need to go off book for just a second. The most common method for the seller to sell their mortgage property is by doing a cash sale. The sales price belongs to the seller. Before the seller can collect, they have to pay off all the lien holders. Remember our lien priority? Everybody's standing in line with their hand out going, pay me, pay me, pay me. The seller's at the very end of that line. So the sales price minus all the lien holders, all the expenses, all the debts in between. And once that's all said and done, then the seller gets what's left. The cash in a cash sale is coming from the buyer and their lender. They're the ones paying the purchase price. All outstanding liens, debts, expenses, our commission, everything is deducted from that purchase price. And what's left is the seller's net. This is the most common method. Buyer pays the sales price. Buyer with their lender pays the sales price. Seller pays everybody off, and then they get what's left. That's their seller net. That's that math we did in Unit 8. Seller net. Other ways that sellers could, if the lender allows, sellers could pay off their mortgage. Now we're back in our book on page 371. And less common, I think we're getting ready to learn why. There's something called seller could sell subject to the mortgage, which means the seller could give the buyer their mortgage. If the event of the buyer's default, the seller keeps the liability. The seller is responsible for the outstanding debt. So all the liability is still on the seller. The buyer's not responsible. As a seller, does this sound like a good idea to you? Does it sound like something you're going to say, sign me up? See why this isn't that common? So the seller could sell subject to the mortgage. The seller could also sell assuming a seller's mortgage. The buyer could assume the seller's mortgage. If the buyer assumes the seller's mortgage, they take over all the payments. The liability stays on both. So if the buyer stops paying, the lender will go after the buyer first. If they can't get the buyer, then they go after the seller. These are really rare. You got to get the sellers to agree to still be responsible in a way for the buyer's debts. No, we're not going to do that. Why would somebody do it? I have no idea. I have no clue. So we've talked about the deed of trust. Remember, I got two instruments. I got two documents going on. We got the deed of trust, which in North Carolina is just what we call the mortgage. The mortgage is the pledge. The mortgage is the collateral that the lender has on the property. The other document was the promissory note, which is our bilateral contract, the IOU. The promissory note does not get recorded. As with any legal document, question comes in, how common is the assuming a seller? Never heard of it except when I'm teaching pre-licensing. Why do we have to talk about it in pre-licensing? Because it's in the syllabus. So the promissory note has some essential elements, again, some required ingredients if the judge is trying to figure out the validity of it. So some required ingredients. There we go. Required ingredients. The term has to be spelled out. Borrower and lender have to agree on how much does the borrower want to borrow? What are your payments going to be? How long do you have to pay it back? Is it going to be a 10-year loan, a 15-year loan, a 30-year loan? So we have to agree on the terms. Because it's an IOU, the borrower promises to pay the lender. The borrower promises to pay the lender. The borrower signs it, acknowledging that they've agreed to pay the lender. Remember, you marched into the bank and said, give me $270,000. The lender said, yeah, I'm going to need some kind of commitment from you first. First off, yes, I'm going to charge you interest. I don't understand why people get so upset because the lender charges interest. Let me borrow a couple $100,000 from you. See if you don't want to make some money off of that. Yes? So the lender's making money off the money that they give you. But in order to protect themselves, we have this promissory note, which is the IOU, the promise to pay. Promissory notes are generally negotiable instruments. A negotiable interest is one that can be serviced. Servicing a loan is, in lender speak, what happens when the lender sells your loan. So they originate the loan for closing. They provide you that money to give to the seller to satisfy your agreement to pay the purchase price. And then it's not uncommon, especially if it's a negotiable instrument. It's not uncommon after closing, after it's a done deal, for the lender to service your loan, sell it to another lender. Again, why they do that, we will talk about in Unit 15. We'll see that on Thursday. If it's non-negotiable, then it can't be serviced. Some lenders do keep their loans in-house. Some lenders will maintain them and let you pay them. Anybody have their original lender? Whoever originated your loan is who you're still paying. So absolutely, they can keep it. But I think what we see most often, most common, is it gets serviced after closing. And we'll talk about why on Thursday. Start at unit 15, you can read it. If you can't wait till Thursday, you can read all about it in unit 15. There are some common provisions with our promissory note. Some common provisions. You very well may see an acceleration clause. The acceleration clause allows the lender to accelerate the maturity of the debt in the event of the borrower's default. So the borrower defaults, they miss a couple payments. If they can't come up with the whole note due, the lender can accelerate when it's due. It's due immediately. If you can't come up with it, we're going to take it to foreclosure or short sale. So an acceleration clause accelerates the due date. Am I going in and out on you guys? Can you hear me okay? Everybody see me okay? Am I staying? Okay, must be on your end. Another common provision we may see in the promissory note is a prepayment penalty. Some lenders, not a lot anymore, but some may charge a prepayment penalty, which means they're going to charge you a fee if you pay it off early. If you pay it off early, the lender's not going to collect as much as what they originally thought when you originated the loan. When we pick our calculators up on Thursday and do this math, we're going to see how loans are amortized and how the lender can lose money. They're not going to collect as much interest if you pay the loan off early. So if you win the lottery and you come up with a lump sum and you play it off, the lender's not going to make as much. If you pay more than the required monthly payment, that's less interest that the lender's going to collect. So they may, again, we're not seeing a prepayment penalty as much as what we used to. However, they're still out there. And then another common provision we can see in the promissory note is called the due on sale clause. What this one says is that the entire amount due, the entire amount owed, the entire note is due when you sell the property. So if you go to sell, remember the lien holder is very top of the lien priority. And they'll call the whole note due on the sale of the property. This is also sometimes referred to as the alienation clause. So if you sell your property before it's paid off, that will trigger the due on sale clause. So if we look at an example together, a bank loaned Roy, who is a home purchaser, $350,000 at 4% interest rate, repayable in monthly installments for 30 years. Several years later, Roy defaulted by missing 4 payments, and he still owed the bank $338,000. The bank sent a notice of default and gave Roy an opportunity to catch up on the missing payments, but our buddy Roy never responded. The bank initiated the acceleration clause and told Roy if they don't come up with the entire note due, they're going to foreclose. Roy's failure to make the payments in this example, Roy's failure to make 4 payments is what caused the bank to accelerate when it was due. They did give him 30 years. Roy messed that up. Does that make sense? Gave you $350,000, said you got 30 years to pay me back. Roy didn't uphold his part of the agreement. So the bank said, you want to avoid foreclosure? Come up with the whole note due. Questions? So Don't forget, midterm link is live somewhere between now and Monday night. Everybody good? Midterm between now and Monday night. On Thursday, we are going to start with a Kahoot. We're going to do Kahoot for units 9 and 10. So that'll be good contract review Kahoot. And then we pick back up where we left off in unit 14. And honestly, where we are is right here at the math. So bring your calculators on Thursday. Please, you guys, please don't forget to go basic calculator shopping before your exam. I almost always have somebody that shows up and says, I didn't know I needed a calculator and I can't let you use your phone. So does everybody hear me? Please go calculator shopping. It'd be hard to do this math without a calculator. So bring your calculators on Thursday. We'll do the math. We'll finish 14 and we'll keep going. Get started in unit 15. We move forward. That's it. That's all I got. 100. Y'all have a good afternoon. We will see you guys on Thursday. Go get some sunshine.